Jaima, Jaima. Finally, on the occasion of the full moon, we'll get to have our conversation, which we've been meaning to have for so many weeks now. That conversation about Kundalini emergency or spiritual crisis. We'll talk about, the very real psychosis that can sometimes be induced as a result of spiritual practice. And I want to distinguish three different kinds of lunacy. And it's important to note that the word lunatic or lunacy, which of course is a highly politicized word and needs to be approached with a lot of care, caution, and nuance, which Ma willing we'll be able to do tonight. That word lunacy or lunatic has to do, of course, with Luna, with Selena, with the moon. And tonight is the full moon. So before we get into any of that, before we distinguish between the three kinds of lunacy, which is the first project for us, and before we get into the material on Kundalini, Shakti, and why it is that spiritual practice can sometimes go awry, and most importantly, what we can do to protect ourselves from that, before any of that, let's just invoke Mother Kālī. Here during the Sandhya, as the sun begins to set, let us chant her dhyana mantra, her meditation mantra, which allows us to visualize Mother Kālī, and we'll visualize her in the heart. And this is important. Often when we close our eyes and try to visualize something, which is arguably the most important thing you could learn to do in the tantric tradition, because so much of our practices have to do with creative imagination, visualization, etc. Often when we try to visualize something, notice you're more likely to see it as if it's being projected in front of you. When you close your eyes and think about, like, say, an image of a goddess or even like a dot of light or a lotus, it's often appearing in front of you. And that's because the eyes are used to seeing in that way. So when I look at the world, everything is in front of me because my eyes are perceiving light in that way. So similarly, when I close my eyes and try to visualize, say, Kali, she's going to appear as if she's out there in front of me. And often our teachers in the tradition have told us not to do it that way. That's fine. Obviously, with eyes open, we're also seeing God. All this is verily God. No problem with that. But when the eyes are closed and we visualize God within, the claim that we are making subconsciously and that we are reaffirming and reifying with every practice is this, that the reality, which I would otherwise consider to be an other, is one and the same with my own essence nature, with my own essential self. That Kali, who I am worshipping as the goddess, as the absolute, is nothing other than my own existence, my very being, in the deepest sense of that word, being. So this can be a bit strange in the beginning because as you try to visualize Kali, it's going to be difficult to see her as if she's in the heart. That means she's sitting here looking out the same way you're looking. Because she is you. You and her are one. Tattvamasi Shvetaketu. That thou art. So you imagine her seated in the heart, gazing forward. And the vision that you will concoct, if you will, in the psyche, in the mind, is as per the dhyana mantra. So we'll chant it in Sanskrit. I'll just loosely translate some of the verses in English, and we'll try to recreate this image in the heart. Now it's going to feel like you're looking in to your heart, as if you're like on the outside looking in towards the center of your being. Then this idea of outside, inside, me, Kali, all of that disappears actually. And then there's just Kali, and even you, the one who meditates on Kali, ceases to be as you become absorbed in the image of Kali. And then there's only Kali, and then we feel like these arms are Kali's arms, these legs are Kali's legs. We've attained tadatmiya, total identification with the deity, which can occur through a serious, sincere effort in visualization. And it's easy actually to get absorbed in the image of Kali because she's so beautiful. Like when you hear this mantra, it's poetry, it's profundity. Just so captures the mind that before long you forget all about yourself and only Kali exists. You forget all about the world, you don't know what time it is, you don't know where you are. There's only Kali. Because of how beautiful the image is, this is likely to happen, especially if you're predisposed in that way. So let's try. Also, as I often point out in other places, especially during our puja lectures, the dhyana mantra is not just a guide for visualizing Kali. Of course, it is mainly that. The Sanskrit of the mantra describes the physical form, the sthula sharira of Kali, with her arms and weapons and skin color and hair, etc., etc. Actually, the extended dhyana mantra will also describe her geometric form. That is to say, her yantra. So the 15 points of the triangle, within which there is a bindu, and then the circle with the 8 petals of the lotus with the bhupura. That's also described actually in some of the extended versions of this mantra. And not only that, before this mantra is chanted, usually there's a rishyadi nyasa, which means you're installing the mantra in different parts of the body. As per the tantric tradition, this is very common. Here, before you attempt the rishyadi nyasa, you acknowledge the bija mantras, that make up this Kali mantra. You acknowledge the bija, the shakti, the kilaka. You acknowledge, of course, the rishi and the chandas, all of that stuff. And of course, we acknowledge that this deity's name is Kali, and this mantra, or to be precise, this vidya means a feminine form of mantra. This vidya is Kali. So notice, in this whole process, I'm going to skip the yantra part and I'm going to skip the mantra part. But in this whole process of dhyanam, meditation, you are visualizing the goddess on 3 levels of subtlety. The physical form, which you imagine as having hands and face and whatnot. The subtle, arguably sacred geometry form, where it's like just the yantra kind of shape that's a little more abstract. And I would argue one of the most abstract forms, which in some traditions is second to the yantra, in other traditions is even subtler than the yantra, and that is the mantra. The mantra is the pure sonic vibration that doesn't necessarily even come with the visualization. All 3 are intoned, invoked, called out, called upon as part of this dhyana mantra. So it's nice to think of this dhyana mantra as being incredibly dynamic, capturing every aspect of divinity, sthula, sukshma, and as you would say, maha, karana, like coarse. Maybe that's one way we can translate sthula. I think maybe physical or tangible, sukshma, subtle, and then of course causal. These 3 levels of subtlety. But also, one more point I want to make here is that this dhyana mantra is not just a guide for visualization. It is also an invocation. So beyond just the meaning of these words, which we'll translate loosely, there's an energy to these sounds. And when we chant them, hopefully that will come across. You can hear the kind of guttural ka, ka, ga, ga sounds. You hear the way the Sanskrit sounds are all arranged in order to create a transformative effect in consciousness. So you should be able to feel the energies of Kali as a result of hearing and contemplating upon this mantra, even if you don't know what it means. That's the beauty of this tradition, because the words have phonetic power in and of themselves, besides their meaning. You know, both are important, but here you can just treat this whole thing as an invocation of Kali, and that's what I want to do first and foremost. Let's visualize her, let's invoke her, and in her name, we'll talk tonight about Kundalinī and whatnot, and we'll lay all of this up at her lotus feet as an offering. I will talk about Laxmī Puja also, and I'll talk about Sarasvatī Puja, and then compare that to Kali Amavasya or Shyama Kali Puja. So we'll talk about Laxmī, who we're celebrating today, Sarasvatī, who we'll celebrate in February, and of course Kali, who we're about to celebrate in October. October 20th is the new moon, and that's the big celebration for Ma Kali. So we'll talk about these 3 aspects, Laxmī, Kali, Sarasvatī. I'm going to make the claim, hopefully at the end of this lecture, to this effect, that they're all aspects of one reality. Obviously, the one we call Kali is none other than Laxmī, is none other than Sarasvatī, is none other than your very own essence nature. And here I'm going to compare that to the Chandi, the Devi Mahatmya, the central text of Shakta, in other words, goddess-oriented Tantra. And there, you see also there are 3 goddesses, Mother Kālī, Mother Laxmī, and Mother Sarasvatī. And we'll see how the 3 goddesses of the Chandi correspond to this post-Navaratri tradition of celebrating Laxmī, then Kali, then Sarasvatī. And hopefully at the end of the lecture, if there's some time, Ma willing, after we cover the Kundalinī crisis, spiritual emergency stuff, we'll get into the Trika, or the Purvamnaya, and argue how this trinity of goddesses, which is really just 3 aspects of one reality, one absolute truth, we'll talk about how that informs the Chandi and informs the celebrations and the festivities that we're going to engage in together over the course of the next however many moons. So here we go. Let's start with the invocation of Mother Kālī. Of course, this is a good time. The sun is setting. We've lit some incense. We've lit the candles. We've dimmed the lights. And entering into a meditative state, let's for a few moments just contemplate Kālī. And before we do this, it's nice to just sit, close the eyes, sit up tall and straight, thereby becoming alert and centered, and then just take a few breaths. And as you breathe in, feel like you are breathing in purity, spiritual power, energy, strength. And as you're breathing out, you're exhaling all impurities, all hang-ups, all blockages, exhaling a kind of love and peace and joy that emanates out from your being to like envelop the whole world. Inhaling spiritual power, exhaling, sending out this vibration of joy, peace, etc. So as you take these deep breaths, let the breaths be meaningful. Let them be attended to with this inward sankalpa or intention. Breathing in power, breathing out peace, joy, love, letting everything go, etc. I'm going to put on a tanpura. We'll just chant Om 9 times together, just to call in the vibration of meditation. So chanting Om, you can do it internally with the breath, quietly on the inhale and on the exhale, or on any exhale of your choice, you can do it out loud along with me, joining your voice to mine and feeling how all of the sounds in the world are being drawn into this one vibration, entrained, as it were, into this present moment, reconciled in some underlying reality. We'll inhale to the first of 9 Oms now. ह्रीं श्रीमन्महाकालभैरवसहितायै श्रीमदक्षिणकालिका देव्ये नमः इत्यस्य मन्त्रस्य भैरवऋषिः उष्णिकचन्दः ह्रीं श्रीमदक्षिणकालिकदेवता ह्रीं वीरं ॐ शक्ति ह्रीं कीलकां पुरुषार्थचतुष्टाय सिद्धाये विनियोगः. Om, this is the mantra from Mother Kālī. Bhairava composed it. It is in the meter of Ushnik. To Kali it is attributed. Its bija is Hrim, its Shakti is Hom, and its Kilaka or its pin, which holds all the words together, all the energies together, is Krim. Now meditating on Kali as per her dhyana. Karālavadanām ghorām muktakeshīm chaturbhujām Kālikām dakshinām divyām mundamāla vibhūshitām Sadyaschina shira kadaga vāmadhurdvākarām bhujām Abhayam varadam chaiva dakshinodvādapanikām Mahamegha prabhām shyamām तथा चैव दिगम्बरीं Kantavasakta mundali galadhrudira charchitam Karnavatam satanita shavayugma bhayanakam Ghoradam stram karalasyam pino natapayodharam Shravanam karasanghathai kritakanchim hasanmukhim Srikkadvaya galadrakta dhara vispuritananam Ghorarava maharodrim smashanalaya vasinim Balarka mandalakara lochana tritayanvitam Danturam dakshina vyapi mukta lambika chochayam Shavarupa mahadeva hridayopari samstitam Shivabhir ghorarava-bhish chaturdikshu samanvitam Mahakalena cha samam viparitarataturam Sukha prasanna vadanam smeranana saroruam Evam sanjindayet kalim dharma kamarta siddhidam Karala Vadanam Ghoram, I praise that terrifying, fierce goddess, Karala Vadanam Ghoram, Mukta Keshi Chaturbhujam, whose hair is wild and free, who has 4 arms. She is Kali, who is the southward facing goddess, Kalikam Dakshinam Divyam, Mundamala Vibhushitam, who is garlanded in a necklace of heads. Sadyas China Shirakadaga Vamadhurdva Karambujam. In her lotus-like left hands, she holds a sword and a severed human's head. Abhayam Varadam Jaiva Dakshinordvada Panikam. In her right arms, in her right lotus-like hands, she assures fearlessness and grants boons with the Abhaya and Vara mudras. Her skin is the color of a dark and splendorous storm cloud, and she is clad in only the 10 directions, reveling in nakedness. She is smiling, full of intoxication and joy, and amusement, Hasanmukhi. Her 2 lips are stained red with blood. Blood trickles down the corners of her 2 lips, framing her beautiful face. Her 2 fangs are terrifying. Her breasts are full and comely. Her waist is girdled with a belt of human hands. The blood from her mundamala, from her necklace of heads, stains or anoints her neck and body. She is standing on top of the chest of her husband, Mahakala, Shiva, in the form of a corpse. She is ever desirous of union with him in the reverse position. She dwells in the cremation ground. All around her, jackals are howling, filling the directions with their awful shouts. She herself roars, displaying her anger. She is that cremation ground dwelling terror. Maharaudrim, Ghorarava Maharaudrim, Smashanalaya Vasinim. Or she is the one who abides in the refuge, the alaya, that is the cremation ground, or the temple, that is the cremation ground, alaya. Her 3rd eye, Balarka Mandalakaram, Lochana Tritayanvitam, resembles the mandala or the circle of the freshly risen sun, or the hymns of the Vedas, the Soma Mandala, Surya Mandala, etc. Her long flowing hair, Lambika Chochayam, falls to her right side, Dakshina Vyapi Mukta Lambika Chochayam, because she is stepping over to the left. This Kali is pleased and quick to answer all prayers. One should meditate upon Kali in this way for the attainment of dharma, righteousness, artha, wealth, kama, pleasure, and siddhi, spiritual empowerment. Om Mahamaye Jagan Mataha Kalike Ghora Dakshine Grihana Vandanam Devi Namaste Parameshwari. Om salutations to you, the sovereign of this universe. Namaste Parameshwari. You are the great sorceress, the confoundress, who is concocting all this magical display of phenomena. Mahamaye, you are the mother of the whole world. Jaganmata, you are the terrifying Kali. Kalike Ghora Dakshine. Salutations to Dakshina Kali. May this be an offering at her lotus feet. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Jai Ma. And you know, the first thing you might notice about Kali sadhana or Bhairava sadhana or Tantra in general is that it's quite secretive. And these hymns are often only really revealed in the context of initiation. So when one formally takes a mantra in a process called diksha, initiation, the guru, as part of like a disciplic succession or as part of a tradition, will then present this dhyana mantra along with the mantra to be recited in order to connect to the deity to whom the mantra is ascribed and who the mantra is, as it were. So why all this secrecy? Well, especially with images like Kali and Bhairava, you can see just off the bat, it's kind of unhinged, no? There's like some very chaotic elements included in this dhyana mantra. There are themes of intoxication. There are themes of death and change and decay. There's this like mad ecstasy that Mother Kali exhibits as she dances with joy in the cremation ground. She's covered in quote unquote impure substances like blood and various other things, and she's engaged in the sexual act, so there's like obvious like erotic imagery, but there's also imagery of violence, the garland of skulls, the girdle of hands, the various weapons that Mother Kali is holding, and of course the jackal's howling, she herself is howling, there's blood on her lips as she's smiling, fangs, etc., etc. Like this could be very disturbing to a person who is not predisposed to thinking of God in this way. So often I think there's this sense that if we were to present these images to just anyone, it might not always be good for them. Like for some people, contemplating the absolute in this way is going to be just what they need. It's going to be incredibly spiritually nourishing to contemplate mortality, to enter into, at least mentally, the cremation ground of this world, to recognize death, decay, impermanence, to enter into the raw, unburdened energies of sexuality and violence, and to recognize that they are, in truth, divine spiritual energies that can be reclaimed and directed towards God. Like all of that could be really great for a certain kind of person. However, for a different kind of person, all of that could, I think, induce a sort of psychosis or induce a sort of, dare I say, lunacy. And I want to use that term very precisely today. Like I said earlier, it's a very political term. It's a very delicate term. It's a term that we obviously don't have the expertise to discuss in like a Western academic scholarly way, having had no training in like psychotherapy or psychiatry. So I'm just going to give that disclaimer off the bat, like right from the get-go. I just want you to know that everything that I'm going to be talking about tonight with regards to quote unquote lunacy, as I'm going to describe it, which I'm going to like characterize as being of at least three different kinds, it's going to come from the tantric, maybe even Ayurvedic psychiatric position. So this is a traditional understanding as per our text, as per our tradition. And in some cases, it might corroborate what you might be hearing in the Western model, but I am not at all qualified to speak from the point of view of the Western psychiatric model. And that's a valid and very important model too. So what the therapist might be saying or what the psychiatrist might be saying, that might be valuable to listen to. And of course, we can criticize the Western world for its lack of inclusion of spiritual states as being like part of their diagnosis. Like often people are sent to treatment who otherwise would have benefited from a different approach, maybe. So things are problematized in the Western world as being like bad or problematic. They're pathologized, maybe, and that can be criticized. However, that's not really my job to do because I'm not at all a trained psychiatrist or therapist. At most, I've studied a little bit of Jung, and of course, that's, like that does not qualify one to speak intelligibly on subjects like psychiatry or psychology. It's like, just from the get-go, this is my disclaimer. I'm not going to be speaking from that point of view, though some of the terms that I'm going to use, like psychosis or like crisis or like, yeah, Gilbert G, this is not financial advice. There's a disclaimer, right, before we hear things like this. I'm going to be talking about things that are quite delicate, quite nuanced, and very political. That being the case, I want to just like, at the beginning, just clarify a few things, get this out there, that we're not speaking from a psychiatric point of view, and nor are we attempting to represent the diverse traditions of Western psychiatry and whatnot. Like all of that's great. It's just not where we're coming from. We're not qualified to speak on that, on behalf of that tradition. But we will speak as far as we can, as far as Ma wills, from the tantric point of view, or the even Ayurvedic point of view when it comes to things like this. And I want to talk about quote unquote lunacy, as it were, and explain how like this could be desirable in one case in a spiritual sense, but I want to distinguish that kind of lunacy from two other kinds of lunacy. So let's start with that. I want to like categorize or clarify that lunacy can maybe mean three things. And I want to use that word specifically because lunacy or lunatic, like I pointed out earlier, has to do with the moon, with the luna, with Selena. And tonight we have a Purnima. So happy full moon, one and all. It's a very important Purnima. It's Laxmī Pūrnimā, the time when we celebrate beauty and abundance and elegance and charm. So I'm really hoping everyone's lighting some nice scented candles. Everyone's wearing new clothes. I know Sandhya Devi is warm under the blanket, which is exactly how you ought to worship Lakshmi, in luxury and beauty. I hope some of you will be drawing baths, put some flower petals in them and invest in some really nice bath bomb, etc., etc. Make the house beautiful. Make sure the floor is really nice and clean, that your clothes are really nice and clean, new clothes ideally. Do something beautiful, like have a bath, listen to beautiful music, etc., etc. Cultivate. Make sure the house is well lit. I'm not a very good example in that regard because I tend to like things a little darker on the darker side. But like it would be good to today cultivate a sense of beauty and elegance and charm because today is the Purnima of Mother Lakshmi, the goddess in the form of elegance and beauty, Indian Aphrodite, if you will. So not only is it Lakshmi Puja though, it's a powerful full moon because it comes right after Navaratri and right before the big Amavasya for Mother Kālī. So there's these big events happening. There's Lakshmi Puja and then coming up is Kali Puja and I'll see Tarini and I'll see Kalidasi and many of you here in Los Angeles for that. Then after that there is Sarasvatī Puja actually coming up also next year in February. So these like big dates. Celebrating these three different goddesses, which are all aspects of one and the same goddess. Like this is a powerful time for spiritual practice. It's an exalted time, astrologically speaking. And of course, there was the 9 nights of the goddess Durga that we just finished a couple of days ago. It was like Navaratri and all of this. So today is a full moon. And I want to acknowledge that the word lunacy or lunatic has to do with the moon. But also, I want to point out that the moon is deeply associated to the subconscious mind. Dharmakaya, Jaima, 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 I missed you so much. Rudra Priya is there, Jaima. Oh my God, we're in Dharmakaya Devi's house today, which is crazy. I don't usually get a chance to do that. Usually, we're in Kuleshwari's house for these Denver gatherings. But hey, Deepa Leela, Jaima, Jaima, Jaima. I'm so happy to see everyone together in Denver. Jaima and Sandhya is in Denver and Kuleshwari is in Denver. Yes. Sandhya would be there at Dharmakaya's house having s'mores, if not for the fact that Sandhya is already under the blanket having warm cookies. So like, okay, good. Everyone is celebrating Lakshmi Devi. But as we were saying, lunacy or lunatic, it carries the connotation of the moon, and the moon is, of course, very important in spiritual life. You can say the moon is associated to the subconscious mind, to emotions, to psychic forces. It's a somewhat startling fact, but an important fact. It's a statistical anomaly, I think, that in most parts of the world, if not everywhere, during the full moon, there is a higher report of like car accidents or of physical accidents. The ERs tend to be quite full during the full moon. And that's like just like arguably something you could talk to any doctor about. Anybody who works in the ER, you can ask them about this. And most of them will testify more or less to the fact that during the full moon, the ER tends to be really busy. And it's not to say there's like lycanthropy or anything like that. It's an uncanny, if I may say so, coincidence. Of course, we don't think it's a coincidence. We know in the tradition what the moon represents, and we know when the moon is full, there's a lot of udana vayu, upward moving energy, and naturally then things can become rather unstable if we don't know how to ground those energies, and things can become very intense, and that's why people might be very sensitive. Of course, it all depends on your own astrological placement, etc., etc. We're not going to get into any of that tonight, but I just want to make this point first, that the moon is very important in spiritual life because it tends to be associated to, whether actually or just poetically, the mind. And what is spiritual life but something you do on the level of the mind? Spirituality, I'm going to argue, and forgive me for saying, is a deeper approach to psychology. Like where psychology is interested in examining thoughts, in examining emotions, in examining dreams, I would argue that spirituality is fine accepting those things too, but drives at something deeper. What is the source of all these thoughts? When a thought emerges, what is that? What is it to think? Where does the thought vibrate? Where do words and emotions shine? Like, what is that being in which this psychology is being experienced? So, my psychological self, my physical self, those two things, those two realms or dimensions are very important and very beautiful, but they are united by a third thing. There is some common center that allows me to both feel the subtle realm of thoughts, emotions, and dreams, as well as the physical realm of sensations, physical objects, physical world, etc. What is that? What is that reality which gives me access to the mind, to the dreaming state, to the deep sleep state, and of course to the body in the waking state? That we call the spirit. Some people call it the soul, spirit. We choose to use the word Kali or Brahman or Shiva, etc., etc. But this is what spirituality is ultimately about. And you could argue that essentially, Essentially, spirituality is nothing more than cultivating interiority. It's all about going within. And the first thing you're going to encounter when you go within, like when you close your eyes to meditate, or when you start chanting mantras, or when you start contemplating symbols as part of your puja or ritual practice, the first thing you'll encounter in this journey of going inward is the mind. Of course, you don't stop there. You go beyond the mind. Though to get beyond the mind, you must go through the mind. And therefore, you're going to encounter all of these complexities that are not just personal, but also arguably from a Jungian point of view, universal. Like you're going to enter into what Jung might call the collective unconscious. And I've argued in different lectures that the smashana, the cremation ground, is one of the best symbols that the tradition offers for this collective unconscious because it's a place beyond reason. It's a kind of dark realm, actually, where untrammeled wild forces, the Dakinis and Yoginis, stir and abide and demand blood sacrifices. It's like a place where the reasoning, rational mind is at a loss for words. So the smashana is a wonderful metaphor. Smashana means cremation ground. It's a wonderful metaphor for this subconscious mind because arguably the mind emerges from it and dissolves back into it. So when we go to the cemetery or this smashana, the cremation ground, we contemplate death. And necessarily when you contemplate death, you're forced to think about what's beyond. And importantly, what's beyond what? What's beyond life? But be specific. What do you mean by life? By life is meant that experience which is arising in and being understood by the mind. So life is nothing but a mental experience. Even your physical sensations are experienced within your psychology, within the mind. That's why if somebody is in a certain psychological state, they might not feel any physical sensations. In a different psychological state, they could be hypersensitive to lights and to sounds and to textures. So the experience of the physical sensual world is mediated by the psychological world, by the mind. Think of it this way. If I was looking at the color blue, where does the experience of blueness occur if not in my mind, if not in my subjective experience? I cannot at any time point to a reality called blue apart from my experience of blue. My experience of blue, Nila Darshana, to use the traditional language, is one and the same with Nila, with the color blue. So arguably there's no physical world that can be proven or pointed out here, outside of the mental world. And my God, this can go really deep. I know X number of things and I don't know Y number of things. I've seen X number of things and I cannot see Y number of things. My mind is not only that X, it also includes that Y. So in the mind is contained all the things that I know and all the things that I've seen, as well as all the things that I don't know and all the things that I have not yet or will never see or can never see. So I'm not talking about like knowledge and perception as being the mind. I'm talking about the mind as that in which both knowing and unknowing occurs. That in which both seeing and non-seeing occurs. So the mind is a pretty broad category. In any case, there's nothing but the mind and nothing but the experience of the mind when we talk about life. Life is the experience of the mind. So when we go to the smashan, when we sit in the cremation ground and we do sadhana, spiritual practice for Mother Kālī or Bhairava or any of these kinds of things, it's funny. I like to go to cremation grounds a lot as per our tradition. And it's so funny. All over America, I've been to all sorts of different places in America. And of course, my favorite is Salem because there's some very old places there, very psychically wonderful places. Anyway, when I go to these places, sometimes there's a big sign outside that says no Santeria. Especially in like New Orleans and stuff, it says no Santeria. It's so sweet because there are different traditions. In the Indic world, it would be Buddhist and Jain and Muslim traditions who would also go into the smashan. So it's not just like Shaivas and Shaktas who are there. It's also Vaishnavas. One time I was in Tarapet, Ma Tara's place in Birbhum, West Bengal. And I was there with a wonderful Baul, Haridan Das Baul. And he was guiding me and showing me the smashan. And he pointed to this like line and he said, on this side is the Shakta side of the smashan, meaning those who are buried here. And by the way, not all people who die in India are cremated. Some of them who are Christian and Muslim are, of course, buried. But even among the quote unquote Hindus, some of them are not cremated. Like some of them are immersed into the water and some of them are even buried, especially very saintly people. We don't cremate them. At least we put them in the water or something. Sometimes we bury them. So even after cremating them, they're sometimes consigned, not to the water, but sometimes to the smashan, to like the spot on the ground where the cremation fire was like stuck there. So think of this as a cemetery where people are buried, okay? But it's an open air cremation ground. Anyway, there's like a line, and this great Baal was telling me on that side of the line is the Vaishnava cemetery, and on this side of the line is the Shakta cemetery. So everyone over there, they're practicing Tantra with a Krishna emphasis or a Radha emphasis, like a Vaishnava Tantra. Here, they're practicing Shaiva Shakta Tantra. And then if you die, you get like consigned to either side depending on your sect, depending on your practice. Now, Haridan Das Baal's mother was buried at Tarapit. Her ashes were consigned to Tarapit. But on the Shakta side, though she was a lifelong Vaishnava Tantric. And so Haridan Chakrabarti was kind of laughing about that. He was like, it just so happened that when she died, they buried her here because they didn't know that she was a Vaishnava. And like he was laughing at that because it's mother's play, that actually ultimately these are not two different sects. They're all there in the smashan. So my point here is that when you're in the cemetery, and I know I'm digressing a bit, but I'll come back to the point in just a moment. When you're in the smashan, you're not just going to encounter Shaktas, worshippers of the Divine Mother. There you might also find Shaivas, the original smashan practitioners, I would argue, historically speaking. But you will also encounter, of course, Tantric Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist. Nowadays, if you want to purchase a kapala or like a bone ornaments, like the Tibetan and Nepalese import stores are like some of the only places that you can get these things. So a big part of Tibetan Tantric Buddhism and Nepalese Buddhism is smashana practice. And even if you don't go to the smashan, there's the imagery of the cremation ground, like when you worship wrathful deities like Mother Kālī and others. And of course, Kavindra Deva could speak to this a bit more. Maybe he will later. And there's many leelas of the Buddha sitting and having his disciples watch bodies burning in real time, etc. The smashan is an important place for Buddhist sadhanas, and mainly Tantric Buddhist, Tibetan or Nepalese Buddhist sadhanas. So there are Buddhist. There are also Jains, not just Buddhists, but Jain sadhus also do their practices in cremation grounds. And what to say of all the Muslim fakirs who are there? Not fuckers. Once I said, oh, Shirdi Sai Baba is a fakir. And someone was like, huh? You called Shirdi Sai Baba a fucker? I'm like, no, bro, fakir. But I guess he would have enjoyed that. All these fakirs, they can be kind of mischievous, some of them. So I think they would have enjoyed this wordplay. Fakir means like mendicant or like Muslim saint or something like that. Fakir. My Guru Deva the other day said something profound. He said, Christ was a fakir, not fucker. Although I'm sure some of the powers that were at that time would have thought so. And now even. But he was a fakir, meaning he was a simple wandering mendicant who was blissed out on God and was willing to share that freely with one and with all. So fakir means like saint or like sadhu, but in the Muslim sense. And it's actually wordplay because faqih means one who is versed in the Quran. Fakir means one who has gone beyond mere mental understanding of Islam and who is now living Islam. So in the smashan, in India at least, you meet fakirs from the Muslim tradition. You meet Jains, you meet Buddhists, you meet Shaktas, you meet Shaivas. I mean, oh my God, it's a liminal space. And in that liminal space, Mother Kālī lives, for she is the goddess of liminality. And all traditions are all included there, all as valid approaches to religion. But look at what's being claimed. All these different religious traditions are all trying to do the same thing. Whether theistic or non-theistic, whether Buddhist or Hindu, whether Abrahamic or Dharmic, everyone in the smashan is trying to do the same thing. Can we appreciate this point? If nothing else today, just take this point away. This will save you, I think, a lot of psychosis in spiritual life if we can just learn this one point. So if you don't mind, I'm kind of skipping ahead in the lecture because at the end of the lecture, I want to give some spiritual hygiene tips from the tradition for not going insane while you do Kali sadhana. But this is one of them. At least understand this point. All religions in the world, and it's hard to understand now when you're hearing this maybe at the beginning of your spiritual journey, why this idea will save you so much heartache in the future. But just at this point, just take it on faith that this idea will help you a lot in the days to come as you intensify your practice. There is only one truth, one reality, and it is infinite in expression. That means there are infinite ways to experience this reality, to enjoy this reality, and to reach this reality. No, we are. And I'm going to make a few different points about different kinds of insanity. So again, I'm hoping to bring a lot of nuance into this word lunacy and lunatic, which can be very political and very under-nuanced when we talk about it. Okay, so this point I want to make, that all religions are essentially equally valid ways to enjoy that infinitely variegated, infinitely expressive reality, which we call God. So whether you're calling that reality Kali or God or Dharmakaya, or whether you're calling it I don't know, whatever you want. You can call it beauty, truth, science. It doesn't matter what name you give to that ideal unit abstraction. The idea is that there is something or there's an absolute. And the goal in spiritual life is to attain it, to recognize it, to realize it, and thereby experience the maximum and deepest fulfillment that can be had in this life. That's the goal. So everyone who is doing spiritual practice in the smashan, more or less are doing the same things. But generally, even where there are differences, the principle is the same, which they're all, and is this, they're all trying to realize the absolute. And they call it by different names. The Buddhist will call it something, and the Hindu will call it something. The Shakta might say Kali, the Shaiva might say Bhairava. Again, it doesn't matter. On the Vaishnava side, they call it Krishna. On the Shakta side, they call it Shakti, but both of them are worshipping the same Tara, Pirta, Vasini, Matara in whatever form they want. So here's the point I want to make. The Smashan is the place of choice for many different traditions who all have a different understanding of the absolute. Why? Because although there are differences among these various religions, in principle, this is one thing that they're all trying to do, to go beyond this life, this changing, temporal, transient, ephemeral, how many, what do you call it? You know those words that are homonyms, not homonyms. Synonyms, yes. How many synonyms can I find for samsara, the coming and going of the cyclical birth and death and rebirth? Like everyone's trying to get beyond that, beyond this life of finitude, to that infinite reality, which is arguably a quest to go beyond the mind. Because as we just said, life is nowhere experienced but in the mind. There is no life. There is no samsara. There is no cyclical existence of birth, death, and rebirth. There is no finitude, ephemeral, transient reality, except that which is experienced in the interiority of psychology. I'll put that another way. That is the mind. The mind, by definition, is Maya, because nothing can be shown to exist beyond your mental experience. Because to prove it, to experience it, to verify it, requires a mind in the first place. So mind, mentality, psychology is prior to physicality. I hope you can appreciate how dramatic that point was, because it totally overturns the way that we view society and we view reality in this modern day and age. We think the world comes first, and then the mind comes after, and the mind then processes the information that it gets from the world. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's just the opposite. And we can prove it too. Right now, right here, show me one thing that exists that is outside of your mind. And if you can point to it, by virtue of having pointed it out, by virtue of having experienced it, necessarily then you've proven that it's in the mind. So there's no world but the world that is experienced in the mind. There's no such thing as life except the mind. So when you say spirituality, religion, or even, I don't know, science or art, these are all quests for the infinite, for the absolute. They're all a quest to go beyond this life, to go beyond this world, to go beyond this samsara. And notice what that means. Like, hopefully, now the first point is quite clear. Spirituality is the attempt to go from the finite to the infinite, from the relative to the absolute, from this world to something beyond, from this life to something deeper. Essentially, this is saying only one thing: it's about going beyond the mind in all of its capacity, but particularly in its storytelling, projecting, reasoning faculty. Vikalpa, we call it, which is, you can translate that word to imagination or projection, and that's a good word, projection, but it could also mean differential thought construct. And this is important because all the data that this world contains is within the mind, but the mind then must select which data is interesting for this particular organism, and at the expense of all the other data, which is perhaps less relevant to that particular organism. Haven't you wondered why at a party, when it's like really loud around you and people are all talking, if somebody were to say your name, you might immediately hear that, whereas people are saying all sorts of things and you don't process it? Because the mind, arguably, is selecting for reality based on its vikalpas, based on its set programming, if you will, or its stories, or its axioms, or its projections, if you will. So the mind, with its vikalpas, is what we mean by reality or life, and spirituality is about going beyond the mind. And what do we call a person who is a lunatic or insane or, mad? We call them irrational. We call them out of their mind. Madness means to be out of your mind. And isn't that what spirituality is all about, ultimately? It's about going beyond the mind, beyond reason, beyond what you thought was true to what is actually true. And what is that going to look like to all the other people who take what they think is true to be true? If you were to discover something more true than what the mind thinks is true, everyone else would probably think you were mad, because you would be stepping outside the cultural stream, the accepted norm of what is true and good and real. So the smashan is a bad place for the worldly, because that's where people go to die. And who wants to die? That's where life ends. Who wants life to end? That's where the world as we know it stops and a wild, untrammeled, unknown begins. Who would want to go there? It's not surprising then that the Brahmanical world, obsessed as it was with purity principles, saw the smashan as impure. Because purity is all about discernment. It's all about using the mind to distinguish X from Y based on arguably reason or based on things that you find in the scripture. So if the scripture tells you you shouldn't eat garlic and that you shouldn't eat onion, then that's through reason that you've come to that conclusion. You read it in the scripture, you reason out that the scriptures must be true, or you reason out the effects of garlic and onion in the psyche and you think, oh, there's a rajasic kind of, you can use reason, but then ultimately it's with reason that you distinguish between foods that you should eat and foods that you shouldn't eat, or people that you should hang out with and people that you shouldn't hang out with, or things that you should see and things that you shouldn't see. And that's all well and good. But in the smashan, that is we'd argued as a symbol for the ending of reason. Of course, there's no notion of purity because there's no longer any reason to distinguish between pure and impure. The smashan is an unreasonable place, an irrational place, if you will, a wild place, as we were saying in a different talk. So what then will the Brahmana, the Vedic think about the smashan? The Vaidika will probably see the smashan as a place of great danger, a place that threatens the social order because it threatens reason and rationality and logic, because it destroys, I will say, destroys vikalpas or disentangles you from vikalpas. So don't go there. That's the advice. Don't go to the smashan unless you have to. Only go there to perform the funeral ceremony and then leave as quickly as you can and take a bath, for crying out loud. When you leave the smashan, they always argue in the Vaidika world that you should bathe. And in the Jewish tradition too, there's a very specific ritual that you do, washing your hands before you go into the cemetery and coming out. Once a practitioner of the Jewish faith brought me to their cemetery to sit and do some practice for their mother and whatnot. And it was a Jewish cemetery, and she was showing me all the rituals that they would perform before they enter the place. And it's like very similar, like achamanam type stuff involving water and purification. But it's very important to perform that as you leave the smashan, because you have to purify yourself from that place. So it's not just the Sanatana Dharma, Vaidika, like Vedic world that saw the smashan or the cremation ground as being impure. It's also the Judaic world, which arguably Christianity and Islam inherit in toto. So the Judaic world has the same, I don't say superstition, but perception of the smashan, and they're right to have that perception. I'm going to argue that like it's good that we fear the smashan. We should. We who are clinging to our societally approved constructs, which are very helpful for us who want to be in the world, we should fear the smashan because it would mean the end of those constructs. It would mean the end of the world as we know it. And that's what death is. So we go to the smashan because we want to encounter death. Because in death, we meet truth. Because by truth, we define that which is beyond life, beyond the world, beyond the mind. Isn't that beautiful and elegant? I hope you enjoyed that piece. Now, who do we worship? When it comes to Shaivism and Shaktism and many forms of Tantric Buddhism, this question is asked, what is the best symbol for God? The best symbol for the absolute? Knowing that the absolute is that which is beyond the relative, and knowing that the relative is nothing but the world, or this body, or this mind, what we generally call this life, this experience. The best metaphor for God, or the best symbol for God, is death. Obviously, because death is when this limited life ends and we go beyond, something new emerges. So we worship death. Those of us who are Shaivas and Shaktas, not like in that like, oh, kind of, it's I would argue it's a nuanced understanding of death. Death not as like, macabre goth vibe as such. I mean, that's cool too. But death as a principle, as the end of the limited intellect and the beginning of something far deeper, far richer, but also far more disturbing because of its foreignness, of its strangeness. So I'm going to argue that the smashan is not the only metaphor for this realm of untrammeled wildness. Also, the jungle is another metaphor. So Kali is sometimes described, as I said in a previous lecture, as the goddess who dwells in the cremation ground, but sometimes also the goddess who dwells in the jungle. That's another thing, the jungle. And often in India, you'll find that the cremation grounds are in the jungles. Like they're not in the city, they're not in the village, they're like in the corner of the village, often in a kind of unruly place. That's why there are a lot of dogs, and where I grew up, hogs. And they look cute, but they're feral and very dangerous. I know somebody, by the way, who was also practicing in the cremation ground, and one time he tried to feed one of these hogs. They're cute little mammals. He was excited, he fed the thing bit his finger off. Like it was the bloodiest thing you ever saw. Like it literally bit his finger. I was like, oh my God, these guys are fierce. These wild pigs, hogs. So there are hogs, there are jackals, there are all sorts of animals because it is wild. It's adjoining the forest. So all sorts of animals come there. snakes, all sorts of things. So it's a dangerous place, obviously. And it's dangerous as a symbol because it symbolizes that which the mind is terrified of, death and the end of reason. And you know what I'm going to argue that means? The end of control. That's what ultimately reason is for. It's about controlling my experience. The reason I would discern X from Y is because I'm trying to control the outcome. I want the outcome that comes from X, not the outcome that comes from Y. So I use my mind to discern X from Y so I can get the outcome I want and avoid the outcome I don't want. Do you see how reason ultimately might come down to like this control complex that we have as human beings? And that's not wrong. It's good. I mean, our civilization depends on that. We learn to control ourselves. Because if we didn't know how to wake up early and go on the hunt, or if we don't know how to stay up late and follow the migrating deer or something like that, we wouldn't get the catch and we wouldn't be able to feed the village. So it takes discipline to be able to hunt. It takes discipline to be able to gather. So hunting and gathering, a large part of that depends on mastering and controlling one's own self. First, then as human beings, we learn to control everything around us. We built tools, and with tools, we were able to build hydroelectric dams, and eventually we realized electromagnetism and whatnot. Like, we're really great at controlling things. And that's why I gave the example of the garden or the example of the city to contrast the example of the jungle or the example of the cremation ground. Because the jungle or the city is nature tamed, it's death defied. Isn't that what it is? Because in the city, there are hospitals. The infant doesn't have to die. The mother who is, about to like die through pregnancy, which happens a lot sometimes. Infant mortality rates can be really high. Mothers die a lot in childbirth. It's a very scary thing, giving birth. But we've controlled it. Now there are cesareans and all sorts of things. It's like relatively safe to give birth. That's remarkable, actually, because it not always is the case that giving birth is safe and it's treated with a lot of reverence and a lot of ritual because it's something quite dangerous. So there's death. There's a lot of death in the jungle. There's a lot of unpredictability. But in the city, everything is controlled. I mean, we even controlled nighttime. Like we don't have nighttime anymore, especially in Los Angeles. Ntarani would know. Like we live in that atmosphere where there's a lot of lights, and like because of that, we own the night in a very real sense. Like the night no longer terrifies us. We've subdued the night with our music and with our light, and that's good. We as human beings are the kind of organism that is powerfully controlling and shaping our environment. And I love that about us. That's wonderful. That's the ability to use the mind to discern and through that discernment, control for outcomes and select for those outcomes that are more desirable and avoid those outcomes that are less desirable, like decreasing infant mortality rate, increasing lifespan, increasing overall well-being and health. And again, this is where it gets really complicated because some people would argue that those who live in the forest are much healthier. Swami Vivekananda sometimes argues that Native Americans who like live on reservations, and back then, of course, they really were living in many more traditional settings. They're much more impervious to cold than the city dweller, and they're much more impervious to sickness because their lifestyle, they're breathing fresher air and drinking cleaner water. They're very active in their traditions and their medicine practices and the ritual use of tobacco, etc., etc. There's so many things that lead to a kind of lifestyle that might be considered more wholesome or more healthy in that rural setting, in the tribal setting, tribal and not in the pejorative sense. But in the city life, one is so stressed. There's always sounds, you're not getting good sleep, your cycles are thrown off. I think even Fraser conducted a study where he found, anthropological study, he found in Europe that women who lived in cities were much less likely to have their cycles match the moon compared to women who lived in pastoral rural settings. There, most of the women were ovulating during the full moon and menstruating during the new moon, more or less. And often there's this phenomenon where when women live together as like roommates, they tend to like sync up, their cycles sync up. And that's worth studying. The link between cycles and energies and transmission and the moon, all of that is something we do study and take very seriously in the tantric tradition. But these are in the Western world just like things to point out. During the full moon, the ER is overflowing. I don't know. Insert some funny joke about werewolves here. Or a woman, her menstruation is cyclical. What else is cyclical? Maybe the moons and the tide. Maybe there's some link to the oceans and the moon. I don't know. It's just poetic. Anyway, the point that I'm making now is that you could argue that a rural pastoral life is healthier in some sense, but you could also argue that you're much less likely to die in childbirth if you live in a city because there's a hospital nearby. Is that fair to say? That in some ways, life is more controlled in a city. There's less unpredictability. So reason is very helpful. It's very good because it controls for outcomes, and that's what civilization is. So when you look at Lakshmi, whose Purnima we're celebrating today, Exoterically, I'm not going to talk about Lakshmi in our context because we're talking about her in a much more Shakta tantric sense. But exoterically, she's the goddess of wealth, which literally translates to money. I don't think that's a good way of understanding Lakshmi at all because wealth is not money. Wealth is abundance that comes in the form of connections, pleasure, beauty, luxury, comfort, safety, all those things that money can buy. Imagine you have a lot of money, but you suck at spending it, which is the case of a lot of people with money. It's like they have money, but they don't have Lakshmi. You know what I mean? I mean, they do in one sense, but they don't know beauty. I, Bad Taurus placements or something. I shouldn't judge because I have very good Venus Taurus placements, so I'm in a place of Taurian privilege. So I should check myself before I call anyone out on their lack of self-care. I'm like, girl, draw a bath, put flower petals in it. Will it really take that long to make everything beautiful? Like, will it really take that long to like light some candles for crying out loud? Yeah. Does it really hurt to buy clothes that are like quality clothes? Spend money. Take all of your friends to dinner and for crying out loud, don't split this check, because you're insulting Lakshmi with your self-imposed scarcity. Never call yourself poor, never say you have no money. Don't make jokes about it. Don't think it's cool to be like broke and stuff because that's insulting Lakshmi. You're not broke. Every breath you take, you're connected to the abundance of this universe, this cosmos. What an insult to say that just because you don't have money in your bank, you don't have abundance. Ugh, look at the Christ. He had nothing. He didn't have shoes even, I would argue. Maybe like the simplest of sandals. He had the simplest of smocks, maybe, and he wandered about absolutely free. And he would point to like the flowers and he would say, look, look, look. Even King Solomon, by the way, he's in the lineage of kings. So he's talking about like his forefathers and dissing them almost. He's saying, look, even King Solomon was not clad in raiment finer than this. And he points to the lavender, the beauty of the lavender, which we cannot appreciate because we're running to work to make money. And for what? So we can buy furniture from some catalog that some corporate company tells you, like, oh, this is the TV you have to have. This is the chair you have to have. Anyway, so Christ would point to the birds and he would say, do you think they care whether they sow or they reap? Do they store their things in banks and stuff? Like they're birds. They live moment to moment. They don't worry about anything. The Lord looks after them. Don't you think he'll look after you? There's that sense of dependence in, I wouldn't say just necessarily God. I'm going to say God as nature. Khalil Gibran has beautiful lines here. I really recommend reading that book, The Prophet, especially with its reflections on love and money. Very beautiful, and on work. So there Khalil Gibran makes this point. He says, is not the thirst when one's well is full the unquenchable thirst? The only unquenchable thirst? And that's what happens. We want money, not wealth. So we get lots of money and we wonder why we're so poor. Isn't that interesting? I think some of the poorest people in the world are people with lots of money because they associate money with wealth. And therefore, the more money they make, the more they need to make because they're struggling with the sense that they're not wealthy yet. And some people, they're very little, but they feel so abundant that they live like kings, queens, and the non-gendered word of ruler. Like they just like live as sovereigns because they're sovereigns over themselves and they can appreciate beauty, like the Christ. So the Christ was a king, but a true king, in the sense of like one who is like just connected to the real abundance. And that doesn't, by the way, negate money. It just argues for what money really is. So I'm going to argue that like Lakshmi truly is abundance, the force of elegance, beauty, charm. It's Shrishti, it's creation, it's fullness, it's the full moon. And we should understand that in the fullest sense of the word. But here, I'm just going to point out that usually when she's depicted exoterically, her hair is bound. Haven't you noticed? Lakshmi's hair is tied up. Very rarely will you see Lakshmi's hair wild, unless we're talking about the Tantric Lakshmi, like the Mahalakshmi, which is a different depiction. That's more like Durga, with her wild. Oh, actually, Jata. Her hair is bound in Jata, but still kind of wild, and she's killing the demon. But here, when we see her in most murtis, meaning most images, paintings or statues, when we see her depicted in classical Indian art, she's often a clothed woman wearing a nice sari with braided hair. That's important because if she's the energy of abundance and wealth, and if she is understood as money, if money is a symbol for wealth, then money is a function of the reasoning mind. It's a function of society, civilization. You wouldn't really have money if you didn't have an urban sort of setting. Receipts. The idea of like giving out receipts to keep track of purchases. The idea of like an abstract currency. That takes reasoning. That takes the mind. And so much of like the world of finance, I think Kavindra Deva, who has infiltrated that world, we have somebody on the inside behind enemy lines. I'm kidding. There are no enemies ever. But Kavindra is there worshipping Mahisha in the bowl of Wall Street. Though he's told me actually that they're not on Wall Street. all the Wall Street people are not there on Wall Street. It's a red herring. So if you're gonna, occupy anything, like they're not there, they're like somewhere else. Anyway, so yeah, so those worshiping Mahisha on Wall Street, like there you would even argue like it's so conceptual, it's so abstract, like what a hedge fund is and what like all these like different I can't even speak about it. It's like not even a realm of the mind that I have access to. I don't have diksha into any of that. But they're mind concepts, they're constructs. If everybody were just to go to the bank right now and withdraw money from the bank right now, it wouldn't work. Like the money is abstract. The debt is like sold and bought, and like it's all an abstract accounting system. Therefore, money is a civilized energy. Yeah, money is debt, right? Money is debt. The buying and selling of credit and debt. That's what receipts are for, to keep track of that debt, accounting, receipts. All of that's wonderful, by the way. I'm not knocking it. It's a very powerful energy and it's a powerful use of the mind. But money has to do with society. And if Lakshmi, understood exoterically, is seen as the goddess of wealth, as money, then of course she's going to have her hair bound because she's a civilized force. She's a rational force. And that's why people love her a lot, because we who are in the world, we who are in the cities, and we who are in our minds love the concepts of our mind, like money, and therefore we're always praying to her for money. And it's so sad because she's like, I could have given you the world, and instead you want to see some numbers on a screen. That's what you cared about? You're crying all night because of numbers on a screen when there are lavenders? Even King Solomon was not clad in raiment finer than this. You can't enjoy this kiss? You can't enjoy the grass that longs to touch your feet, or the wind that delights to play in your hair? Like, you can't enjoy any of that. I'm loosely quoting Gibran, right? The wind longs to play with your hair, and the earth delights at the kiss of your feet. Like, you can't enjoy that because you're obsessed about numbers, numbers on a screen. I mean, oh my God, what could be more abstract than that? A two-dimensional plane with images that represent abstract entities that might not, sorry, Platonists, have any corresponding reality. you know so I would argue like wealth can be understood as money, and if it is understood as money, that would be one reading, but that's also a valid reading. And Lakshmi as money is often a domesticated force, consigned to the mind. That's wonderful, no problem with that. Saraswati as learning, notice that too has to do with society. The Vedas are an urbanizing influence. The force of the Vedas, arguably, a big part of that is to structure society or call in energies that would be constructive to civilization, to like, math, astronomy, all of that. But therefore, because it's of the mind, because it's of the world, you can see that much of that in the Karma Kanda is like one part of the Vedas. You can see there, if Saraswati is depicted as holding the Vedas, then if by the Vedas you understand it superficially to mean that knowledge which constructs society, then of course Saraswati's hair is going to be bound, like Lakshmi's. But I want to argue that these are not actually the deepest readings of the Vedas or of money. Money is not necessarily wealth. Veda doesn't necessarily mean only that knowledge, aparavidya we say, that is good for society. Veda also means paravidya. Paravidya is there in the Upanishads. I would argue it's there in the Karma Kanda and many of the Brahmanas, in many of the stotrams, the hymns of the Vedas. In the Samhita portion of many of the Vedas, you find these ideas about reality that go beyond aparavidya, conventional knowledge. This is higher knowledge. And therefore, we use the symbol of like Matangi when we want to talk about tantric wisdom, or I would argue essential Vedic wisdom, which is one and the same with tantric wisdom. The wisdom that takes you beyond the conventional mind. And that goddess, Matangi, who is the tantric Saraswati, Neela Saraswati, her hair is wild and unruly. This is a very important point. Like in our iconography, in the symbols of our goddesses, we're making very, I would argue, sophisticated claims about money and knowledge. Abundance is not money, and wisdom is not knowledge. But again, knowledge is not wisdom, and money is not abundance. Is that fair? I'm not excluding money, and nor am I excluding knowledge. I'm just pointing to something beyond money and knowledge. I'm pointing to something beyond the exoteric depictions of Lakshmi and of Saraswati Devi. So there we have these civilizing influences, Lakshmi and Saraswati, and in our puja paddhati, as part of our tradition, in our ritual, when we worship Narayana, Vishnu, who is the preserver, the maintainer of the cosmos, we worship him along with Lakshmi and Saraswati, understanding those to represent civilizing influences. Okay, now check this out. Once you move into the smashan, you leave all of that behind. You leave behind the civilized idea of money or the civilized idea of knowledge. You leave behind civilization. But what have I essentially been saying, if not this? You leave behind your desire to control. You go to the smashan because you surrender to the goddess. Do you see? Elegant. The idea of, it sounds like I'm congratulating myself, but these aren't my ideas. I'm merely representing the idea of the lineage, and I'm very proud of these ideas because they're some of the best ideas that I've ever encountered. And if I were to find any ideas anywhere else that are better, I would drop this at once. I care only about these ideas, and thus far I have not found a more sophisticated system of philosophy and understanding and wisdom than this Vaidika tantric tradition. But I don't really care about the cultural stuff. I'm happy to say that because some people get lost in all the like, oh, we have to preserve the culture. That's cool, but why? Because it contains this wisdom. And this wisdom is transcultural. It has nothing to do with any one specific people. I am not teaching Hinduism. Fuck that noise. I'm not teaching religion. This is philosophy. By Vedanta, Swami Vivekananda did not mean religion. Religion is a cultural response to wisdom. It's a symbolic presentation of these things which I'm trying to unpack together with you now. So that's the exciting thing. So forget Hinduism, forget Buddhism, forget all of that. Take the smashan now as a metaphor, as a principle. The cremation ground, by the word smashan, I mean cremation ground, is that place which denotes a loss of control, because it denotes a loss of reasoning, because it connotes surrender to that which we deify, death. So what are we? Worshippers of death, because we're trying to surrender the mind to that which lies beyond, and that we just call Mahakala. Mahakala or Mahakali, time. Another word for death is time. And a very sophisticated way of understanding death is ending. And endings only occur in time. So we worship time, but it's not that. We worship, and Kali. Kali is not a really fair name, I would say. It's a name, of course. But the name that the Jayadatta Yamala Tantra, one of our core texts, gives to this goddess, to this depiction of the absolute, is Kala Kali Sankarshini. Sankarshini, meaning the one who devours time. So Kali is time, but she is also that which devours time. So she is ending and she's atemporality. Anyway, I'll put that aside for now. The main point I want to make is that spirituality, especially as we tantrics understand it, whether Buddhist, Jaina, Muslim, or Hindu, whatever that word means, like we understand spirituality as the quest to go beyond the mind, the quest to go beyond our need to control everything, which again, we're not knocking, that has its place too. And the smashan is the best place to do that because it connotes all of that. Now, the jungle is good for that, the smashan is good for that. And earlier, somebody said in the chat, another symbol for the wild, untrammeled subconscious. And it was the ocean, right? Who said that? Somebody earlier in the chat said, what about the ocean? And like, yeah, you're spot on. Oh, there it is. Shivam Chokshi is saying the ocean. Yeah. And you know what? In the Greek tradition, the ocean, I think, as far as I know, I can't speak within the Greek tradition, but like from what I've learned, the Greek tradition sees the ocean and Poseidon actually as that uncivilized force. So Poseidon, it's really interesting. Look at this. Poseidon, what is his weapon? Like, what does he carry? Isn't this a remarkable point of interest here? He carries a Trishula, he carries a trident. He's Shiva. And Shiva is that wild, matted haired god who doesn't live in the city. He lives in the smashan, or he lives in the jungle, or he lives in the mountain, covered in animal skins. He doesn't care for money. The main thing about Shiva is he has no sense for money. He like sucks at his finances. And like that's why you could argue like money tends to follow him around because he just doesn't really care for it. He's not like in her DMs asking her to come over. He's like not interested in Lakshmi. There's a beautiful story, by the way, one of my favorite stories, which I think is the secret to wealth, the secret to abundance. And by wealth, I mean abundance, not necessarily money, but also money. I don't mind including money here because money is one way to depict that. You can include everything. So I think this is the secret, and my feeling is this story. So all the gods and demons are churning the ocean, a primordial myth in the cultural context of Hinduism, Puranic myth. And there, various things come out, including Lakshmi. So here, understanding Lakshmi to be wealth or money, Lakshmi comes out of the churning of the ocean. Now, she's the most beautiful of all, and everybody wants her. So all the gods line up as suitors, all the asuras line up as suitors, and everyone is courting her. You might be familiar with the Indian practice of Swayamvara. Of course, it was among Kshatriyas of that time. But Swayamvara is so beautiful. I'm really proud of it because it's very progressive. It's a culture where the woman decides her husband, but she, and this is interesting, sets up a contest to select the kind of husband that she would prefer. So, in the West, like often, and in various other places, of course, also in Mughal India and whatnot, the women are often bartered off as political, like, chess pieces. So, like, okay, I want to make an alliance with that kingdom. I have a daughter, you have a son, get these motherfuckers married and let's like be an allied kingdom. Like who cares what my daughter wants? Like fuck that. And it's okay. She's a princess. She can fuck around. Like it's okay. It's a royal wedding. So she can have lovers and whatnot. He'll probably have lovers. Like don't worry about it. Like you can still enjoy your life. But you have to get married politically to someone that would benefit the state. So your choice in the matter is not that important. And I think the concession here, even in a Christian context, is that like, okay, like we don't expect this to be the person that you're in love with. It's the person that you're ceremonially and royally married to, but you will fuck around. I think there's like a concession to adultery. Whereas in the Vaidika tradition, there's a bit more of emphasis on monogamy. You could argue like the marriage institution in the Vaidika world is taken very seriously. And that being said, there must be some like harmony in that marriage. And so doesn't it make sense to allow people to choose? And again, this is so remarkable because often what we think of when we think of India and marriage is arranged marriage. And there's some value to that too. But here, and of course, a lot of darkness with that, given the misinterpretations of that system. But here we're talking about queens or princesses who were given the chance to find their husbands. Of course, anybody could come to this ceremony, but usually it would be other princes from other kingdoms who would come. And she would decide what kind of metric she would use to gauge between one man and another. So it was heteronormative, of course, but she would have like, say, okay, she wanted a scholar. Say if you as a woman were interested in like an intelligent man, what you might now call like sapiosexual, like if you wanted someone who was intelligent, then you would have a debate. And the scholars, the brahmanas might come and they will all debate scripture, and whoever wins the debate, you'll marry. Or you want like somebody who's really good on horseback for obvious reasons, I guess. Sorry. And then you like bring a bunch of people together and you have a horse riding competition. Or you want someone who's talented at poetry, etc., etc. You want someone who can shoot arrows. That's the Mahabharata. You'll see it's an archery contest because Draupadi wants a husband who can like perform this feat of intense concentration and skill, etc. So what you're looking for, it's like that time. It's like you don't have to go on Tinder and like swipe around. It's like you just like say everyone show up at this place, fight it out. And this might be a good idea actually. Like just get all your people on Hinge or whatever on your dating app, bring them all to a bar and be like, okay, now go. Like all of you, like we'll participate in a game and we'll see which one wins. I'll consider that one. Save time, instead of going out on like 20 dates with 20 people to see whether or not they meet your criteria, create a game to test for that criteria, bring them all together and have them duke it out. That's called Swayamvara. So she gets the choice. Lakshmi, the queen of wealth. Don't you think she'll be able to choose um her husband? So she also has a Swayamvara. She hosts a Swayamvara. And naturally, because she's so beautiful, everybody wants to come. Like every single person. No, that my whole job, Virupakshi, is to give you ideas. Virupakshi is like, don't give me ideas. I'm like, that's literally my dharmic responsibility to give you. The tradition has many of them. So here's the Swayamvara of Lakshmi. She's looking around, looking for who she's going to marry, and no one is up to her standard. How could they be? She's beauty herself. It's so sad. The goddess is approached by people who have no idea how to worship her. It's like, it's tragic actually, because so many people deserve a level of beauty and devotion that most people in the world are not trained to give or recognize. So often a lot of women in this world, as Lakshmi embodied, their beauty is not recognized or their status as the goddess is not acknowledged and therefore not worshipped. And even if recognized, it takes a lot of cultivation and training to be able to handle, like, what does it mean to worship? Is it just like obsess over someone? That's not worship. Like that's attachment and that's violence and that's manipulation. That's not worship. But what we call worship, this notice me senpai kind of thing, it's not worship. It's like a weird power dynamic in which you want something from someone and then you manipulate them into giving that to you. That's not worship. Worship is done in freedom. Worship is when you have nothing to gain and also nothing to lose. And out of the joy and freedom in your heart, you recognize the divinity and beauty that is there in that symbol of Lakshmi, who is Lakshmi herself. So a lot of people like in the modern world, men and women and gender non-binary people, everyone like has this predicament where they're trying to enter into a world of romance, but they're not meeting people who know how to do that because their Lakshmi energy is not, I mean, speaking that way, not developed, not cultivated. It's tragedy. So Lakshmi is experiencing this. Can you imagine? Just like a person who goes out on many dates and like just cannot find the person for them if they have standards. Like Lakshmi is a person with very, very high standards and none of the gods can meet it. What to say of the Asuras? Like the gods can't, I mean, like Asuras are great too, by the way. They're awesome and resplendent and they can do a lot of tapasya. So I'm not now committing the error of saying asuras are bad or devas are good. They're just different classes of spiritual beings. And Lakshmi tries to select between all of them. Look at this. She's not just selecting between the devas, she's selecting between the asuras. And what's interesting is that she alternates between them. It's really interesting, she goes to the Asuras for a while and she's like their wife for a little bit. Then she goes to the Devas and she's like their wife for a little bit. It's really interesting. This myth is really deep and you can like unpack it. And I don't want to do that right now because I want to talk about this like spiritual psychosis. But because it's the Laxmī Pūrnimā and because I've started thinking about Lakshmi, this is happening and I'm trying to rein it in and I'm trying to control this outcome because I'm using my reasoning and my intellect and my civilization to try to like discern between where I want to go in the lecture and where the lecture is taking me. And I spent too much time thinking about Kali to be able to do this. So you're all fucked. It- we're going off the rails on a crazy train. We're like in this Lakshmi world now. No, let's come back to the point. Lakshmi, after doing this for a while, chooses Vishnu actually as her husband. But why? This is a very important point because Vishnu is not at the Swayamvara. It's such a like irony. The only person that Lakshmi is interested in is the one person, or there are two of them, Shiva, but arguably Shiva's like not even eligible because he's already married to Parvati, right? So Shiva's not at the Swayamvara because he's married to Parvati. And again, that's another really crazy relationship dynamic because Parvati is sometimes quote unquote unfaithful, and that's actually a good thing. Because in Indian aesthetics, in erotic literature, this word chanchala is used to describe a woman's beauty. So a woman who is very flirtatious or coquettish, a woman who maybe has multiple partners or at least gives off the impression of having multiple partners, or a woman who seems fickle and non-committal is considered beautiful. Isn't that interesting? Like here in the West, we would consider it like we have a very different idea of that. We would demonize a woman for like maybe having more than one partner or desiring such, or being coquettish or being flirty or enjoying that energy that she has and wanting to share. Like that's really bad here. But in the Indian aesthetic sense, the word is chanchala, and it doesn't just mean like non-committal. It also means like dynamic, I would say. Like a woman who not to conform to gender stereotypes, but who bats her eyelashes really quickly. From the Indian aesthetic point of view, that would be a pretty thing to do. Or like a woman who dances, or a woman who changes her mind a lot. Oh my God. It's interesting. In the Indian aesthetic sense, that's desired. A woman should, quote unquote, not to subscribe to gender norms, but of course we do in the Indian aesthetic sense. There we say a woman who changes her mind a lot, often, on a whim, is considered more attractive. Because it's a womanly trait. But it's not used to be pejorative. It's actually celebrating those. It's like, oh, women drivers are bad drivers, quote unquote, a gender stereotype that we have here in the West. Vijaya was making a funny joke the other day. She was doing something kind of like crazy on the road. I don't know because I don't know how to drive, so I have no discernment. And someone else was doing something crazy, and she was like, "Don't worry, we're safe because she's a woman driver, so we both recognize the predicament we're in, and we're both chilling, and we're like, it's okay, girl." You're like, there was. She was describing to me the understanding that passed between the two drivers, and she was like, if this was like a white guy right now, he would be freaking out that we like did this. So I think in the Western world, there's a sense that a woman, this is the stereotype, is not a good driver because chanchala, because she doesn't make decisions and stick like she might change her mind, etc. And that's demonized. Of course, that's used pejoratively. We say it's a wonderful thing. Outside, I look like a good boy. Inside, I'm a bad girl. Maybe that's why I can't drive. But it's a wonderful thing, like if a woman doesn't make decisions or she like changes her mind. But why? Because in Indian aesthetics, that's one of the traits of a woman. Yeah, and Kuleshwari, the teacher training is working. At this point in the lecture, we say, at this point, we quote Katy Perry, you change your mind like a girl changes clothes. Or you change your mind like a girl changes clothes. Because you're hot and you're cold, you're yes and you're no, you're up and you're down. This is with regards to like her crush, and she likes that about him, I think. She's frustrated about it, or him or her, them. But she likes that they're fickle. So Chanchala, the goddess Parvati or Kali, is considered a bit of a quote unquote harlot in the least pejorative use of that word. It's actually one thing that's good about her. Like she kind of cheats on Shiva often. There's a lot of leelas of that where she's like running here, running there, and Shiva like plays with her. Like in one episode, he appears as like this mendicant and then seduces her and then appears as Shiva and is like, aha, I got you. And she's like, oh, you got me. Like, it's kind of cute. But Shiva, and this is interesting, Shiva is not like that. Like, unlike Krishna with his gopis, Shiva is super monogamous. And I think that's part of his Advaita, the idea of his oneness, his ekatva. He's like totally absorbed in oneness. And for him, there is only Parvati, and Parvati is Chanchala. It's a really interesting thing, like Shiva's monogamy and Parvati's Chanchala status. But anyway, that's a story for another night. And there's a lot of interesting gender politics that we can explore there too. And beautiful philosophical ideas with regards to Purusha and Prakriti, the immovable spirit, and the dynamic moving creation, which is a movement. There's a lot of tantric ideas from this aesthetic idea. Anyway, coming back to this narrative, Lakshmi cannot marry Shiva because Shiva's already married and he only has eyes for Parvati. He's not gonna, And plus, like, there's also other narratives where Shiva is Lakshmi's father, etc. A lot of things. But Vishnu doesn't have a wife yet. He's single, but he's not dating. He's not there at the bar, like participating in this swayamvara. He's not like vying for the attention of Lakshmi. Isn't this like dating 101 anyway? It's like if you are too forward, and again, if you're too cold, also, there's like a sweet spot here. But if you're too forward and you play your cards too soon, it's like um the person that you're pursuing, the person that you're like engaged in courtship with, will in some cases be turned off. They'll be like, oh my God, this person is desperate, or like, But imagine this: someone doesn't immediately display affection. They're still kind of like almost as if they value themselves so much that they're not so desperate for anyone or just anybody like to like give them validation. The idea of standards or the idea of just having your own life. Like that's attractive. It's meaningful to do your things. And we find that in the dating world, I guess you could say, not to overgeneralize, that can be attractive actually, that a person is self-sufficient, they have interest, doesn't even matter whether they have money or not, they just like love something and care about something and devote their lives to it. And that's an attractive quality, you could say. Vishnu is that par excellence. He's not in her DMs. He's not even looking at her. He's just absorbed in his own bliss. He's so self-sufficient. While everyone else, yeah, today's lecture, dating tips and money tips. You guys, that's just the kind of energy we're in. It's a Laxmī Pūrnimā. What the fuck do you expect me to do? I have serious Taurus and Venus placements. I mean, like, what else could have happened here? Anyway, but here's the claim that because Vishnu is so self-sufficient and so aloof, it captivates Lakshmi's heart. And so she gives up all her Asuric and Daivik suitors who are all vying for attention, and she goes to Vishnu and abides with him, and they're happily married. So the only person who can marry Lakshmi is Vishnu. Only God himself can hold the energy of Lakshmi, and only Lakshmi abides with God, who is beyond arguably any need for abundance. Because he is abundance. She is abundance. So that's the pairing. So the claim they make in the Vaishnava world is that, like, if you want to worship Lakshmi, you can. You can do Lakshmi Puja, but you have to be careful because she's very fickle. Her owl, she rides an owl, is very finicky. So if you ring a bell, she'll fly away. And that's a very interesting idea. Don't ring bells in Lakshmi Puja. That's like a big taboo. Actually, it's so funny. I have a Lakshmi Murti in the house, actually. And I do Kali Puja, like there's a lot of bell ringing. We're bell ringers. That's essentially what we do all day long. Ling, ling, ling. Anyway, so my friend comes over and she notices this, and she's a devotee of Lakshmi. And we had this like theological discussion. It's like, okay, Lakshmi is here. I offer her a puja as part of our like krama, but Kali Puja, I'm going to be ringing bells. And I know we know that Lakshmi doesn't like bells. So what do we think about this? Is it okay that Lakshmi is in this house and we're ringing bells? We're speaking Puranically, we're speaking as bhaktas. Of course, you can insert all your Advaita Vedanta, Shaiva non-dual ideas, Brahman. We didn't do that. We were just talking as devotees about these gods as we understand them in the sense of puja. So she was so moved. No, okay, here's the thing. I was trying to say that it's okay, that like Lakshmi is essentially Kali, etc. But she was so moved by her own devotion to Lakshmi to knit earmuffs for our Lakshmi. So for a long time, you guys, if you came to puja at our house, it was the cutest thing. I wish I had a picture for you. She's since lost her earmuffs, but she used to have earmuffs. Can you imagine? So just, to Anna, thank you so much for the earmuffs. For like years, Lakshmi in our house wore earmuffs to protect her ears from the bell because she doesn't like the harsh sound of bell. And also, there's something deeply metaphorical about this. And it's this. That you shouldn't flaunt your wealth. That like if you go around like telling everyone about your abundance, that's a scarcity complex actually. If you need everyone to understand how rich you are, you're not rich. Like if you don't care what people think your financial status is, that's wealth. I mean, like that's security. You're so secure. Like if you need to convince others that you're intelligent, you have no real knowledge, no real wisdom. What you have, you don't flaunt necessarily. You just have it. In other words, you're so secure in it that you don't need other people to recognize that you have it. I guess you could say that. I shouldn't say it that way. Sometimes what you have, you should express. I'm not saying that just because you have it, you should hide it. That's what I'm saying. I'm making a claim about modesty or lajja or anything like that. I'm making a claim about security and new money versus old money, etc. If you are really wealthy and you know that, you don't need anyone else to know that. Like if you really have God, if you're really holy, you don't have to present as a holy man. right? Like I think a lot of us present as holy, and I'm not knocking this, but there's like a kind of thing where when we start spiritual life, within a week or 2 weeks of the person coming to Hinduism, suddenly they have really huge jata and like they're dressed in like Jesus like Ram Dass clothes, and they've got all the merch. That's great. That's really important too, to contextualize the personality in something new. But it's like part of that is like we're not yet so in it that we need maybe external symbols, and that again, it's very important. But the claim is that if you're really, really deeply established in something, there might not be an external sign of it. That's why Sri Ramakrishna is so unassuming. There's nothing that would indicate that he's a holy man. It's just so many things that would actually indicate the opposite. He doesn't care to present as a holy man because he has God. And if you have God, who needs saintliness? And so similarly, if you have money, who needs other people to agree that you are wealthy? So that being said, if you ring bells, it's like kind of flaunting your wealth or expressing what you should have within as a certainty. So Lakshmi doesn't like bells. Her owl doesn't like bells. So anyway, Lakshmi Puja is very finicky. Like if you want to do Lakshmi Puja, you have to be very careful. Like again, you have to maintain the very highest standards of ritual purity, like the highest standards of beauty and sophistication, etc., etc. But there's a hack. As always, there's a workaround. Instead of worshipping Lakshmi, the Vaishnava tradition argues, you should just worship Vishnu. That's the hack. Because Vishnu is God, and therefore, like God, it's much easier to please God than to please Lakshmi. And if you please God, again, if Vishnu is God, and if Lakshmi is Vishnu's consort, if abundance attends to God, then by worshipping God, won't Lakshmi come too? And you can see that this is the tantric ritual expression of the biblical quote, and those things shall be added unto ye also. Right? That's the claim in the Bible. That, like you don't have to pursue wealth, you pursue God, but once you find God, you get real wealth, and then arguably like those things shall be added unto you also. So don't chase wealth. That's the best way to scare her away. Essentially, I'm saying don't go and spam her DMs and be like, please, please, please. It's so funny sometimes, and I'll just admit this. It takes me a while to respond to text sometimes. And I really appreciate your patience with that. Um, but sometimes I'll get texts from people, and if I don't reply right away, because obviously, since I'm doing this for free, I'm therefore beholden to responding to everybody right then, all the time, because after all, I am an AI like I do have the responsibility, I guess, to be totally available for everyone all the time. And so some people, because they're convinced of that, when I don't respond within like a few hours, sometimes a few days, I get spammed. And like it gets like dramatic. It's like I love this person. I'm not thinking anything, but they're like, "Oh my God, have I offended you? Did I do something wrong?" Like again, I love this person with all my heart, and they're concocting a story as to why I haven't replied within the hour, or within a day, or within 2 days. And the story sometimes gets more and more dramatic, and sometimes it's just they protest and they're like, "Okay, fine," and then they like block me everywhere and they're like gone. But it's funny because I've had instances where like I'm about to like respond to someone, then I get that text, and I'm less likely to want to do it now because now it's like harder to respond. Now it's not like just answer the question. Now it's like, oh no, 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 I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to convey that. Like I actually that's not the reason I was traveling. Like now the communication becomes so much worse. So it's funny in my own case, I'm noticing like when people are constantly like sending one messages, but then constantly sending messages, it's like there's a kind of aversion to dealing with that, to like responding to that. And I think anybody who is in the like world of dating, if somebody's like in your DMs all the time, it's something off-putting about it. It's like desperate energy means that that person doesn't have abundance. Why should I, as abundance, as Lakshmi, gravitate towards that which does not match my frequency? So that being said, pursuing wealth, like trying to make money, ugh. You guys, that's like being in a girl's DMs or being in someone's DMs and just like messaging her every day, trying to get her to come over to your house. What a terrible idea. And arguably nothing turns the goddess of wealth off more than a scarcity complex, which is what we're exhibiting when we pursue wealth for its own sake. Now, pursuing abundance, pursuing luxury, pursuing beauty, the best way to do that is to pursue God, because God is beauty, luxury, abundance in and of itself. Hence, find God and these things shall be added unto you. And the ritual idea there in the tantric world is worship Vishnu. And where Vishnu is worshipped, the house in which Vishnu is worshipped, Lakshmi will always be present. Hmm. Anyway, I'm happy. That was a nice aside on Lakshmi Puja as part of our like Kundalini yoga discussion. Let's come back to the topic now. I'm fucked. Where were we? So, Smashan, yes, jungle. Oh, ocean, yes, Poseidon. So I think it's kind of remarkable that Poseidon has a trident and very much like Shiva. Poseidon, where are we? Madness, Asha Devi says. Yeah, we have to define three different kinds of lunacy. But yeah, anyway, so we have Shiva, who is the matted lock, trident wielding ascetic who is beyond the norm, who is outside society. And then, of course, we have here, importantly, um, Poseidon in the Greek tradition. And by the way, Poseidon is always trying to interrupt the processes of civilization. Right? Like Odysseus's enemy is Poseidon, you could say. Like Poseidon is always like, he's always like stirring the plot. And when you look at the ocean, oh my God, it's terrifying. You don't know what's under the surface, and it's like tumultuous and it's expansive and it's overwhelming, and there's no order there, at least from what you can see. Under the ocean, maybe, there's order. Under the sea, maybe there's like, yeah, there's a mermaid there and she's like got a kingdom and there's Atlantis and maybe. But like when you look at the ocean, the first impression that you get of it is what the fuck is going on here? I'm terrified. And that's why people who sail into the ocean, like there are certain astrological placements that would make a good sailor a good mystic. You could say, because going into the ocean, like that Neptune placement, that kind of like Sagittarius, like ninth house kind of thing. When you go into the ocean, that long distance travel, going far away from your home, or entering into a place where there's nothing, no symbol for your mind to glom onto, just pure space, like that does things to you, and the ocean, as you can see, is a great symbol for the subconscious mind. And notice its relationship to, again, to the moon. Isn't that wonderful? If the ocean is a subconscious mind, then the moon rules over the ocean, or the moon influences the tides of the ocean. So I think it's quite fitting, if you don't mind us coming back to the main topic now, it's quite fitting that on this new moon, my bad, it's always new moon to a Kali Bhakta, but no, on the full moon, it's quite fitting then that we discuss lunacy, which is often associated to the moon, because spiritual practice is about what happens in the mind, but I'm going to argue that it's what happens in the subconscious mind specifically. And that's why a lot of people talk big game about spirituality, but when you actually look at our lives, there isn't that transformation. Yeah, Lee, baby, you're saying like the moon in tarot, that journey, and there are like jackals, right? Like Mars jackals are flanking the path as the lobster, the Jordan Peterson lobster, comes out of the ocean and like tries to make its. You didn't think I would drop that one? That was pretty wild. That was like really out of our ambit. Anyway, this is lunacy. A series of incoherent ideas with minimum conceptual link. There's a thread of like sanity somewhere in all of this. But okay, now let's make this point. There are different kinds of lunacy. When we say lunacy, we say madness, we have to distinguish at least three different cases of madness. There are infinite cases, and I'm not going to pull out the DSM-5 now because, like, as you know, I'm not speaking from a Western psychological, psychotherapeutic, psychiatric point of view. Okay, so I'm not diagnosing different kinds of mental illness. I'm not doing that. That's not my job, and that's not our specialty. But I can say categorically, there are three ways in which our tradition uses the word madness. Madha. Actually, many different ways, but let's just put these three on the table. The first is the desirable kind. Let's start with that. Because if spirituality is going beyond the mind, then a person who goes beyond the mind and succeeds in spirituality will be called mad. And that is a madness that we covet, that we want. I think Dharmakaya might be experiencing that right now. Like that's what devotion looks like, mom. But like that's what Ramakrishna, the greatest bhakta of Mother Kālī there ever was, exhibited. He was called the madman of Dakshineshwar. But wait, there are other kinds of madness. So before you diagnose yourself with divine madness, let me say that we are also probably mad in other ways. And like this madness is not so simple. It's not so simple. It's the greatest and rarest of us, of humans, that have this divine madness. I don't have one iota of it. I would never dare. I could never say that I'm mad for God because we saw Ramakrishna. Like, I don't think in this history, at least contemporary history of religion, I don't think there exists a person who is madder than Sri Ramakrishna. I think he literally is the maddest, baddest, illest, in the sense of like he's just crazy and demonstrably crazy in a way that like even a very tolerant Indian society with a deep appetite for mad mystics found disturbing. He was just so fucking crazy, Sri Ramakrishna. He was crazy for God, crazy in love, like that Beyonce song, I guess. So Sri Ramakrishna, our guru, our guru's guru, our Guru Deva, like our Parameshwar Guru, he is our symbol for what spirituality looks like at its highest level in an embodied individual. Can I just say that? Let's put aside the claims about avatarhood. Let's put aside all like various mythological claims about Sri Ramakrishna. Let's just make a practical point. Based on the history, based on the record that we have, and of course that's liable to critique also, in the history of religion, at least as per our records, a contemporary history at least, we don't find very often someone like that. And I could argue that Sri Ramakrishna, at the very least, is the example of what the utmost madness for God would look like. I'm talking about a guy who couldn't blink his eyes for years because he was so full of bliss for God. Would never sleep all night long. Kali, 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 Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, all day long. There were moments when he would wave the yak-tailed whisk in front of Ma for hours. Like every night, he would rub his face on the ground, crying tears. Ma, another day has ended and still I have not seen thee. And also, the craziest thing about him was he felt that all religions are true, which is a claim that if you say now in this modern world, most people will think you're absolutely batshit insane because every religion says they alone are true. And then here comes a guy who is practicing all of them and who is saying that, like, actually, no, having practiced all of them one after another, having realized the truths of each religion, actually, God is all of these and so much more. And it's all true. And party time, Wayne. Let's like party time, Garth. Like let's go. And then he's just partying all the time. Like he's just the ultimate raver. And arguably the only other model you have for this is Sri Chaitanya. Or maybe Radharani. But Radharani is like, we don't really have histories of Radharani. We have mythologies, and those are of course in India considered histories because we have a different sense of history than the West. We have a atemporal sense of history. But I want to push back against the Eliadic or Jungian claim that this somehow makes us less civilized. Right? Like there are traditions that, like Western academic traditions, that call out dream cultures, like the Aboriginal traditions of Australia, as being less civilized because their prefrontal cortex haven't developed and they're not yet able to transact in the, okay, whatever. Like try do some Indian logic first and then tell me whether or not this is a civilized tradition. But the claim that I'm making is that in a mythological sense, yeah, according to history, Indian history, Radharani existed. But according to contemporary history, we don't really know if she existed, but we do know that Chaitanya existed, and we definitely know that Ramakrishna existed. And when we look at those guys, oh my God, like, what? Has anyone exhibited this level of madness? But here's the thing. This divine madness is the goal, actually. When we look at Ramakrishna, we see the ideal, a person who is absolutely mad for God. But look at what this caused in him. One, he loved everyone and saw God in everyone. So he wasn't interested in reforming them or teaching them or converting them. That's one thing. When a person is mad for God, they give up projects like the evangelical desire to convert everyone to your religion because you're mad. You're so mad. How can you like plan your colonizer quest to Hong Kong? Like, how will you get the ships together if you're mad for God? How will you publicly preach if you're mad for God? How will you get a register? How will you go on a mission and preach your religion and convert people if you're mad for God? If you're mad for God, you'll be rolling on the ground crying hot tears for Ma. You'll be absolutely useless at the office and at the missionary's post. Like madmen for God are not missionaries. They're not. They just don't care about converting others. Like if you're in love with someone, like okay, let's say I have a crush on somebody, right? Do I need to go outside and get everyone else in the world to also have a crush on them? Some people do that. But I would much prefer to just sit at home and think about them or like get into their DMs. Hopefully not. If I'm really crushing, if I'm in love, I'm absorbed in my love. I'm like self-sufficient. I won't have the presence of mind to become a missionary, to go out and preach my religion, to think that other people need to be brought to the light. Sri Ramakrishna never saw negativity in anyone. He accepted all religions. So the first point I want to make about divine madness in this, and this is why you don't have it. I'm going to say to all of you, I'm saying to me, and to the whole world, stop claiming you have divine madness when all day long your constant dialogue is negative. Like you're always calling lizard people here, Illuminati there, I'm bad here, that person is bad there, I'm suffering, that person is suffering, this country is evil, that country is good. Hare, when your mind is filled with negativity, when your speech is nothing but calling out demons and oppressors, when there's so much negativity and darkness in you, your madness is not divine madness. Because what we saw in Chaitanya, what we saw in Ramakrishna is absolute love and an inability to see negativity anywhere. He literally could not see it, he could not call it out. Not that he was naive, in some cases he was, but he just didn't have a problem with anybody. He didn't have a problem with the world. He didn't feel like he needed to fix it or save anyone or convert anyone because he didn't see a problem. He only saw God. So too with Chaitanya, there's a scene where he gets the shit kicked out of him. Like he's absolutely abused by these two guys. You know what happens? He like Christ-like, he hugs them and they're converted and they instantly become disciples. Of course, when we try this, they'll beat us up some more. Because we don't have that energy of divine madness. So we make a pretense of divine madness and thereby hide our real problem. And our real problem is a different kind of lunacy, which I'm going to talk about soon. So now the divine madness is desirable, but notice its first qualifying factor is peace, blessedness, contentment, joy, and the inability to see darkness or negativity anywhere. That's what divine madness looks like. We saw, and again, I'm making this claim based on the his contemporary historical record of what Sri Ramakrishna was like, what Chaitanya Deva was like. Radha Rani was said to be like this all day long. She could only see Krishna. She was mad for Krishna. Mirabai, who actually is a figure in history, was said to be like this, but we don't really have that many records of her outside of her poetry and some things. But like with Ramakrishna, with Chaitanya, we're on surer ground, when we're talking about divine madness, because we saw it in them. And these are some of the characteristics. They were not missionaries. They didn't go out and try to preach their religion to everyone. More so Ramakrishna on this point. Secondly, they were peaceful, joyful, blessed. Thirdly, they brought joy, peace, and blessedness to others. And fourthly, they never saw negativity in others. And by the way, the fourth point, I hope you can see, is distinct from the third one. So I'm just like now, just off the top of my head, I'm sure we can come up with more characteristics, but four things I think that would define a divine madness. One, it is the kind of madness that is full of peace, blessedness, and joy. By Dimitri Jaima. Secondly, it's the kind of madness that fails to see negativity in the world. And thirdly, it's the very productive madness that makes other people feel joyful also. So with Sri Ramakrishna, they said that when they went to see him, they felt like all the things that were so real in their city life became unreal, and all those things that felt like so unreal in religion became real. But more importantly, they felt bliss. They felt a second-hand high whenever they were near him. Do you want to know how you know a holy person? Not by their outfit. Often that's deceiving and problematic. A holy person is someone in whose presence the mind becomes very quiet, or in whose presence the heart feels elated. If you go near someone who is a true Kali Bhakta, do you know what will happen? You'll feel like you're with Kali. In other words, you'll think about Kali. You'll be in the smashan. Like your mind will vibrate on the level of that Bhakta, because that Bhakta has marinated her mind so much in one ideal, so much in God, who is the source of all peace, blessedness, and love, that if you go near them, you should feel that way. What kind of holy man is agitated? By the way, they present sometimes as very like, there's like the, I call it the born again Christian smile. Hi, do you have some time to talk about our Lord and Savior Ramakrishna? It's like you're putting on this idea of happiness, like a youth minister, a youth pastor or something. He's like, they try to be happy, like celebrating God, rejoice. I like that. I like that they're trying to rejoice, but it's put on. It's like inwardly all agitation. Inwardly it's the gnashing of teeth, and outwardly it's peace and blessedness. I would prefer someone who on the outside looks very dangerous and very swarthy and very like unruly, but on the inside is peace and blessedness. And so that's why I've been in some pretty scary situations actually in India, like in smashans, where I'm like, and not only in smashans, once it was like this apartment in Varanasi, and it's like, it's scary sometimes to be in places all by yourself that you don't know. It's even scarier when you're like with like a woman, or like with women in a place like in it. Like we've been in many, many really scary situations where, and we should be careful, of course, but where like I was feeling afraid until I met that holy man who I had come there to meet. And interestingly, some of them, they were Bhairavs, like chillum smoking, like swarthy, they will only see you at night kind of types, always drunk kind of types. Like these are Bhairavs, like these are tantric practitioners, and some of them are pretty scary, dacoit type vibe sometimes. But when you meet them, it's all peace, blessedness, and joy within. Like when you sit near them, it doesn't even matter what you're talking about. Like you could be talking about the most mundane of things, but you'll feel blessed, peaceful. And I really appreciated that when I was in these situations, because I was feeling agitated in those situations until I sat in the presence of such people. And as a stark contrast to the agitation all around was the peace and blessedness that exuded from such a being. So if you are truly mad in this first sense, if you are a lunatic for God, you will not only be a blessing to yourself, you will be a blessing unto others. But you know what most mad people for God are like? They're a problem for others. Like they're always telling you you convert, like you're eating wrong food, or like brother, sister, brothers in Christ. Like it's my duty to protect you from hell. Hare, what if I want to go there, huh? What if I would prefer that? Is it really your responsibility to prevent me from going to hell if that's where I want to go? So leave me alone. It's not your problem where I want to go. Why don't you focus on where you want to go instead? And that's why Swami Vivekananda, he was in a train one time. He's wearing all his Indian clothes. And then a preacher came up to him and started preaching, etc. And they had a discussion. Now, Swamiji, of course, won the discussion because his command of scripture, Christian scripture, was often better than most missionaries. He understood scripture on a deeper level, being, of course, a practicing mystic. So when he won the debate, this was the thing, the guy got angry. Like he lost it and he said, "You're going to hell, sir." And Swamiji's response was stunning. Swami Vivekananda, he said, He said, if you don't practice this, you won't go to heaven. You are going to hell. And so Swamiji was like, oh, but sir, my good sir, where are you going? And the man said, oh, I'm going to heaven. And he said, oh, okay, then I choose hell. If you're going to be in heaven, I'm going there. Like, classic Swami Vivekananda, you know. But like, here's my point. Most people who claim to worship God kill humans in the name of said God. Most people who say that they're mad for God don't spend their time thinking about God. They spend their time on their streets handing out flyers to get other people to think about God. Hare, you think about God first. You be lost in God. How many schools and hospitals do you need to build? Do you think you're doing God's mission? Hare, that's blasphemy. You are doing God's work? Just think about what you are saying. When you are on a mission, missionaries, I call you all blasphemers because you are claiming that you need to do his work. Is your God so weak that he needs you? You can't even pay your own taxes on time. You want to go do God's work. I'm speaking of myself. Like, you can't even like park your car parallel and you want to go do God's work. Hare, you can't digest your own fucking food and you want to do God's work. God digests food through you until she decides to stop. Then you have digestive issues. God assimilates oxygen in your alveolar walls and circulates it through your blood. If you were put in charge of that system for one day, you will die, right? Like you wouldn't be able to navigate all these various, I mean, unless you were like a train coordinator in New York subway system or something, you wouldn't be able to do this. You wouldn't be able to coordinate all the circulation systems and blood vessels and things like that. You wouldn't be able to pump the heart actively. It's hard enough to keep the mind on the mantra. Imagine if you were responsible for pumping the heart. Imagine if the heart was not an autonomous muscle that had its own pacemaker. And we have to put a pacemaker when this one dies out, right? Because we cannot be in charge of that. Because we'll die. We'll die in a heartbeat. Pardon the pun. So God runs that. God is beating your heart. And not just yours, the mouse's heart. Right? The mouse. Doesn't the mouse have a heart? That same God is managing the mouse heart and managing your heart and managing all the hearts in the universe. The ant's heart. Like that God needs you to do work for him? For her? What nonsense. Think about what you're saying for once. If you want to do God's work and God's mission, if you think that you have a mission in this world, a fie upon you and your religion, a blasphemy of blasphemies, vanity of vanities, to think that you can do God's work. Enough, enough. Right now, stop saying that you have a mission. Stop preaching. Stop being an evangelist. Stop creating institutions and organizations and trying to bring all the people to the light. God will do it. She doesn't need you. Like, she could blink her eyes and the world would disappear. She could open her eyes and it would appear. You think she needs you to convert someone? She speaks in the hearts of all. It is her alone in the hearts of a person that causes them to chase after money. It's her alone that causes them to leave money alone. Like, she is the cause. Leave it to her. And my claim here is that Sri Ramakrishna, Chaitanya, they knew God. And if you know God, you know God's power. And more importantly, you know how that power is swatantriya. It's just enacting itself. Why not trust it? Why not leave alone this business of missions and work and etc. etc. None of that. So this is my claim. A holy person is peaceful, joyful. Their divine madness is a blessedness to themselves, first and foremost. In the Gita, it says, having attained that which nothing more can be attained. How do I? Na dukhena gurunapi vichalyate. Like not even the heaviest sorrows can shake you once you attain this joy. The first sign of divine madness. Once I say this, you will see how few of us have it, how many of us claim it, but how few of us have it, is true joy, deep fulfillment, the kind of joy that not even the heaviest sorrow can shake you. You've achieved what there is to be achieved in life. You're perpetually joyful. And I don't mean like toxically positive and happy and cheerful. I mean, you're deeply fulfilled in a way that only you will know. I once asked Gurudeva, like, how will you know? And he said, only you will know. No one, I mean, and maybe your guru can, but very few people, I think, will be able to gauge whether or not you have it. But you know when you have it. And a lot of people don't have it and present as if they have it. And theirs is a very dangerous lot because in years to come, once they're sitting on a big throne with a big congregation and they're like a big guru type, that's when their hypocrisy will really start to sting. Because inwardly, they're not happy. Outwardly, they're trying to make people happy. Whose thirst will you quench when you yourself are thirsty? When you have no water, why tell everyone to line up with their empty cups? And that's what everyone is doing. Telling everyone to line up with empty cups, getting money and giving nothing. You know, what do they give? A few, like, honey, for a little bit of money, you go and do a yoga workshop, and what do you really get from it? Dissatisfied people presenting themselves as satisfied try to solve your dissatisfaction. Vanity upon vanities, blasphemy of blasphemies. The only person who can teach is the person who has no interest in teaching. In other words, a person who is actually fulfilled will share their joy, not posture at it. And that's the thing. Well, Sri Ramakrishna, was full of joy, full of cheerfulness, full of sweetness, and so too with Chaitanya. And not the like mundane kind of happiness of being well fed and like having a successful life, like the kind of joy that's ecstatic, the kind of joy that I think every true drug addict is seeking. I blessed are the drug addicts because they're the only ones I respect, because they're the only ones who are looking for ecstasy. Everyone else is content to be comfortable and then they die, and you realize your whole life was nothing but a to-do list. You woke up, school told you what you had to do, you made a list, and then you died. And you, by God's grace, probably crossed, I mean, family, children, work. Like you crossed a lot of things off that list, and it was good, it was more or less good. But was it ecstatic? Was it the orgiastic bliss of divine rapture? Like, did you really cry all your tears and laugh all your laughter? Again, to quote Gibran, did you really live? And we find that most of us, when we get to the end, we didn't. We wasted it. We blew it. We blew our shot at ecstasy, at joy, at true meaning because of our fucking to-do list. Because of money. Because you want to make money. Because somehow you think that's wealth. It's tragedy. Then you see Sri Ramakrishna, and you're like, that's what I want. Whatever he's drinking, that's what I want. Sign me up. That's the Kool-Aid. Fuck this shit. Like, I want to be that level of happy. And when we see Sri Ramakrishna, and here's the thing, it was not a show because like people were invited to stay with him. And so they could see him for years, they could observe him. So it's not like, oh, he's putting it on and then a month later, it's like all gone or something. I saw a very funny reel on Instagram where it's like workshop retreat hosts or something. And it's like these two people, when the retreatants come, they immediately get up, and there's the Palo Santo and the sage, like they put on the feathers, like it's like a garb, like a costume they put on, when the retreatants come. It's not like that. With Sri Ramakrishna, it wasn't like, okay, come at this time and I'll do the show, and you'll see the Ramakrishna show, and then you'll think I'm so holy. It was like literally 24/7, literally 24/7. People would show up at 3 a.m. to his house. And what would they find? This man pacing the room in ecstasy, clapping his hands, singing to God. I love Berlin, West Berliner. I think they've really understood what partying is like. Americans disappoint me. I come here, I want to go out and party with you guys, and then you want to go home at 2 in the morning. I'm like, what about an afters? And you're like, no, I'm tired, I have work. You're also obsessed with money that you want to go to work, that you come home from the club at 2 a.m. Like, what about the afters? And in Germany, we party, they taught me this. We party for 72 hours. You start on Friday, and if you're lucky, you'll end on Sunday, and then you sleep Monday, or you start on Thursday night. You just go and go and go, and sometimes you're just pulling all nighters one after another. Like that, I respect that. But even then, you burn out. Like even then, it's like too much. Then you have to you crash out a little bit. Not Sri Ramakrishna. He had perfected partying. Americans come home sometimes at 2 a.m. They don't even care for the afters. At least in Berlin, they're willing to stay out for 72 hours and like really party, and go to afters. You know that Miss Bashful song where like the translation of the song is like Ski Agu, he's saying like, girl, let's get out of here. We're fucked up. And then she says, 9 shots? No, bro. She's like, I want to dance more. Like, let's stay. And then he's like, okay, fuck it, let's stay. That's I think the translation of the German in the Miss Bashful song, 9 shots. It's a great song. It's awesome. I would recommend it. Real Kali Bhava there. So that idea of like just partying, like you can try your best. You can have the best drugs. Like you can be on the best coke. Like you can be on like all the stimulants you want. But like even then you'll crash out. Like you cannot keep up with Ramakrishna. If you want to party, if you're a partier, if you like ecstasy and you see Ramakrishna, you'll realize what a child you are in terms of ecstasy. He knows ecstasy. And so that's why like people like Girish, the drunkards of that time, opium addicts and drunkards, they're good seekers of God because they're looking for ecstasy, like I said. But when they saw Sri Ramakrishna, they realized the limitations of alcohol and opiates. They realized like there's only so much I can get from drugs, brothels, parties, etc. Like what Ramakrishna has is actually what I want. That's ecstasy. And so those drunkards, quote unquote, turned out to be really great saints because they recognized in Sri Ramakrishna the thing that they've been pursuing only through means that were more finite. So Sri Ramakrishna, any time of the day, you can just check in on him and you'll see that he's blissed out. And not only that, fearless, relaxed, surrendered, joyful. So the first sign of divine madness, I'm going to say, is this. It's fulfillment. Divine madness, the kind of madness that Sri Ramakrishna had, or that Sri Chaitanya had, or that you'll see Swami Vivekananda had, or our Guru Devas had, like that was a fulfilling kind of madness. And this is how we can distinguish it from other forms of lunacy or madness. This kind of madness is enriching, it's fulfilling, it brings peace, blessedness, joy, and ecstasy. I would say real ecstasy. That's where the madness part comes in because they tend to be quite eccentric. Like with Swami Lakshmanju, Usha Ma, who was here in California with Lakshmanju in the 90s, she told me all these stories about Lakshmanju and how eccentric he was. Like one moment he'd be like just talking, and suddenly he would get up and tell everyone, "Let's go wash our dishes in the pool." And by that he meant like literally the swimming pool at the house that they were renting, or the house that the devotees had given to them to use. Or like once he just had a hole drilled in the wall. Nobody knows why. Maybe he saw a yantra and wanted a bindu. Nobody knows why, but he just wanted a hole drilled in the wall. One time he started showering Usha with money, like you would a stripper, like a sex worker. Like he had that bhava of like I'm worshiping, and he started showering Usha with money, and she's just like being showered. And I asked her like, did it strike you as odd when he would do things like this? And she said no. It's like at that time it felt perfectly normal, perfectly sane, perfectly reasonable. And she used the metaphor. Ushama told me this. It's like smoking weed. It's like if you're really high and someone makes a joke, it's not funny unless you're also high. Then you will laugh. Similarly, when you're with a holy man like this, of this caliber, the seemingly eccentric, crazy things that they do feel normal to you if you're also near them and you're in that state. But if you aren't, and many people aren't, it will seem like sheer madness and they will be judged for it. So Swami Lakshmanju, of course, was like a crazy, eccentric. Sri Ramakrishna, oh my God. Usha Mat at the Kali Mandir, she said the only way she was able to understand Ramakrishna was by actually meeting Swami Lakshmanju. I also, by Mother's grace, had this fortune in my life to have lived with such a person. My grandfather was like that, like ecstatic, And I would tell you stories about how, like, in the middle of the night, I would see him he would be up all night. That's one thing. And then I very rarely saw him sleep. Sometimes he would nap in the daytime. I'm not promoting bad sleeping habits, by the way. I'm just talking about what we saw and I'm saying, like, we should be humble and understand, like, that's a state that we reach by Mother's grace and by practice. So my grandfather, I would notice him like in the middle of the night, just kind of stumbling about, and he would touch the walls and say, Shiva, Shiva. Like you could see like something was going on. I didn't know what the fuck it was at that time, but it really struck a chord within me. Like I was like, whatever that is, that's cool. And then coming to Sri Ramakrishna, it gave me a model for that, like a model for divine ecstasy, what eccentric, ecstatic madmen and mad women and mad people for God looks like. But the first point here is that it's so much joy, so much bliss that it's a childlike sense of wonder and fun. They're fun. You could say, like, if nothing else, it's fun. Fun, capital S. Fucking fun. Fulfilling fun. All the F's because they don't give a F. But now, can I just say this? This is a fun kind of madness. Like, I like to call it that. Like, I often call divine madness the fun kind of madness because the madness rooted in peace, blessedness, joy, and it's the kind of madness that is only eccentric because it's innocent, because it's childlike, because it's spontaneous and in the moment. But here's my second qualifying factor. It's also a blessing unto others. Like I was saying, if you come near such a person, your mind will be elevated. And for that time, when you're with them, you'll feel really, you don't know why, but excited or like more devoted, or spiritual life will feel more tangible to you as long as you're in their presence. That's why it was very hard for Krishna Das ji for his guru to die. Right? When Maharaji, when Neem Karoli Baba ji kicked his body, Krishna Das ji, of course, like did hard drugs, right? He started freebasing. And that's a very important point. Like Krishna Das, who otherwise would have been in Blue Oyster Cult, he didn't do the whole rock star thing because instead he was a kirtanwala at the temple where Neem Karoli Baba lived. But like he would see his guru, and when he was with his guru, given the caliber of saint that Neem Karoli Baba was, and he was also an eccentric, crazy, like funny guy. But like given that caliber of guru, the student's mind is so elevated that being with them almost feels like a drug. I have in mind the Kesha song. You know the Kesha song? Kesha, I said in the Sanskrit way. The Kesha song. Because your love is like a drug. Like their love is like a drug. And like there's nothing like it. That serotonin explosion. By the way, when we fill our kapalas with liquor, like that's the symbol. The symbol is of a mind filled with, like I was saying last week, serotonin or something. It's like that bliss, that love. I don't even know if you can give it a chemical correlate. It's just so exalted that I don't even want to speak in terms of serotonin or dopamine. But it's like, if I can say anything, it's like being on Molly all the time without the harsh come down. The thing about drugs is sometimes when it tunes you up, the fall is also a little dramatic, right? Like, so if you do a lot of like Molly or something like that, it'll be amazing, but after you might have a real fall. And then for some days, you might be kind of dopamine or serotonin deficient. So imagine that high of Molly, but without the come down. Something like that, if we could use some kind of metaphor. It's like a feeling of familiarity, bliss, oneness, etc. And that can be communed. That's my favorite thing. The kind of thrilling thing, the stunning thing about spiritual life is that spirituality is not taught, it's caught. That's why satsang is so important because, like, being with spiritual beings, that does more for you than your own meditation and reading. There's a dramatic scene, There was, and by the way, you sit there and meditate, are you practicing spirituality? It's like you're thinking about everything. Or like when you're sitting there and reading, are you really understanding what you're reading? When you're doing puja, do you really feel Ma's presence? All of these are good practices, but it's when we're in the company of the holy, what Sri Ramakrishna called sadhu sangha, that we're really benefited. Then the mind, and then puja becomes alive. Our reading becomes meaningful. Our meditation becomes focused. So, just sitting with the guru and meditating with the guru, that transmission, or being in satsang, it's important because the guru is not always the guru. The guru is just a human being. But in satsang, we argue, the guru is possessed. Something flows, and then my guru, you can see like something changes in his eyes. Swamiji speaks through him with fire and with force, and then something is transmitted. That's satsang. Satsang is sacred theater, where somebody channels, if you will, the lineage, and then everyone else receives the benefit of the lineage. All of them are blessed by that transmission. That does more for you. So there's a scene, a beautiful scene, where Swami Brahmananda, our guru's guru, was singing Ram Nam. He was singing, right? In his office at one of the centers. And this boy, this young brahmachari who would soon be a monk, he got up to leave Swami Brahmananda's like little satsang. And then Swami Brahmananda was like, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Oh, Maharaj, it's time to meditate." And he was so amused by that. He was like, "Oh, it's time to meditate, is it?" Like, can you imagine? God herself is speaking through the guru, singing through the guru, and you want to go and do spiritual practice? Like, it's weird. It's like, what will you accomplish there at your puja, at your mat? Like, what will you get on your own that you're not getting now in the presence of this, of Raja Maharaj, of Swami Brahmananda? So Swami Brahmananda, he was quite bold. He would say these like stunning things. He would say like, if you've seen me, you've seen Ramakrishna, stuff like that. Like, oh my God, what? Like he's willing to like speak in that way. He's very quiet and very indrawn usually. He doesn't bother to say things in like diplomatic ways. He just says the truth. Or he's playing cards or fishing or talking about mangoes. That's the thing about our guru's guru. He just was so like absorbed, and he loved to smoke the hookah. So sometimes people came to see him and expecting to see a great holy man. Instead, they found a guy fishing, or they found a guy smoking a hookah and like staring into space. He was very quiet. He was really bad in a sense at his job because like it was very hard to get him to meetings because he was always in samadhi. You should hear actually about those early Bellarmont meetings. Like they were crazy. It was so hard to get everyone together for a meeting because their minds were all in God. And so there's one scene. I'm digressing with another story within a story. It's a Purana at this point. But there's one scene where they're trying to do a meeting, and Swami Premananda isn't there. Baburam Maharaj isn't there. So one of the other direct disciples goes upstairs and sees Baburam seated in meditation. And they say, "Bring Baburam. We can't have our meeting without Baburam." So they go upstairs, and Baburam is in meditation. So this bigger disciple literally picks Baburam Maharaj up in samadhi, like, and carries him down the steps and brings him to the meeting. So can you imagine this guy walks in holding a meditating guy and walks into the meeting? And then the moment when they got there, Baburam wakes up, jumps out of samadhi and goes into kirtan. Harinam or something. And then the whole meeting dissolves and everyone starts doing kirtan. That's it. They didn't get any work done. So Raja Maharaj was like that. It was like a pain to get him into like the boardroom because he was the president of the motherfucking Ramakrishna mission. Like his job is the most important job, but it was really hard to get him to like do it in the way that we rational individuals want people to do things. So he was a silent power, like controlling everything, and a true king. There's a psychological thing. If you walk into a room, how do you establish the pecking order? In other words, how do you know who is at the top of the hierarchy, or who is the leader of the pack or the group? Some psychologists, I've read some studies here, they say that the person who is most still and most silent. Everyone else is working, like moving this way, moving that way. The leader of the group is usually quiet and still and silent. Like that's kind of true of lions and things like that also. It's a weird claim, but the claim here is that Raja Maharaj was like that kind of king. He was just quiet, silent, smoking his hookah off in space. And he would sit like a king. He was raised in a lot of opulence. He was child of an aristocratic family, so much so that he refused to massage Sri Ramakrishna's feet because, he had servants. How could he be the servant of his guru? Like he is a king, in all sense, but now he's a spiritual king. So he's sitting there in his robes, like smoking his hookah, just absorbed. Anyway, Raja Maharaj, I'm coming back to this story now, was very fond of kirtan. He was a bhakta par excellence, like his guru. Give it time, Kalidasi, and then you'll recognize your sovereignty over this entire universe. And then you too will recline, hookah in hand, and delight in your own splendor and blessedness, knowing yourself to be the all pervasive power. All will serve you. Knowing them to be manifestations of yourself, you will delight in your own majesty. And Raja Maharaj, I mean, look at his eyes. Like, he reminds you of what you are. Just pure space, pure sky. Just, oh my God. Anyway, so he loved to sing. He was a mystic. I have so many Raja Maharaj stories to tell you, like because he was very fond of ghosts. He could speak to ghosts and stuff. Like he was very mystical, like his master. More of a meditator, more of like a kind of inwardly drawn person. Sharp contrast to Vivekananda. Vivekananda has been described as a stormy ocean whose destructive Tandava is destroying the illusions of the world. Brahmananda is like the sky. Bless you, Kuleshwari. Brahmananda is bless you. Is like the sky, which is like formless and still. So Swamiji, the tumultuous ocean, Brahmananda, the sky. The two of them were a good foil for one another. But they are one. Anitya Hridayeshu. Swamiji would sign his letters to Swami Brahmananda as my brother, not my brother in Christ, my one, my, it, how to translate? Anitya Hridayeshu means non-different heart, my one heart, my inseparable heart. You who are of one heart with me. Like something like in English it would be like I don't know, the apple of my eye or something. No, no, I think that doesn't really capture it. Like we are one kind of vibe. Especially he felt that with his guru Bhai, Swami Brahmananda. And their Leela is so beautiful. They were childhood friends. Anyway, I'm super digressing, but so, I'm coming back to the plot now. Raja Maharaj was singing. He was a mystic. He loved to sing Ram Nam. And this boy wanted to get up and go and sit for meditation. And Raja Maharaj like, God is here. Where are you going? That's the power of satsang. It transmits. So Sri Ramakrishna was really powerful in doing that. So his silent presence was worth a lot. He would just sit there in samadhi and everyone would feel it and they would be nourished even if he didn't say anything. The thing about Sri Ramakrishna though was he would talk all day. He would talk all day, sing and dance. We also gave a lot of instruction, which is really cool. Anyway, coming back to Krishna Das Ji, so with Neem Karoli Baba, so too with him, when you sit near him, you'd feel bliss. So Krishna Das Ji, the famous Kirtanwala here in the West, he, in this documentary, it's called Heart Full of Rhythm, or sorry, I forgot the name of the documentary, but there he talks about his story with drug abuse, etc. But notice it kind of happens right after his guru dies because he's desperate to get into that state of bliss again, which he felt with his guru, which he now no longer has access to because the guru has left the body. So this next point is important. If the only time you're getting that bliss is when you're in the presence of the guru, be careful because soon the guru will leave or the guru will kick the body and then it'll be like your drug is taken away. And in Krishna Das's case, he like hardcore like became an addict because where else are you going to get that bliss? You become hooked on bliss and on the serotonin of satsang that like when you don't have it, you get withdrawals. Be careful. I mean, it's good. First of all, if you're getting high in satsang, good. You're spiritually sensitive, you're picking up on the vibration. And if you start to crave satsang, if you're like, I just need that hit, good. Actually, that's good. But now comes the sadhana to make that your own. So I once asked my guru for a vision, you know. I like begged him. I was like pulling him, Maharaj, please give me this, give me this, give me. And then he looked at me, and we're like that in our lineage, because Swami Brahmananda asked Ramakrishna, Ramakrishna would tap his chest and he would get it, or Swami Brahmananda would give that to somebody, and like that. So we have that kind of, there's Shakti in the lineage. So I was begging Guru Maharaj for something, and then he said to me, he's like, Baba, by your own sadhana, you will have it. That silenced me, and I was like, okay, okay, noted. I was trying to have a particular visionary experience. And I was like, Maharaj, please, because I know he could give it to me. You just touch me, I get it. But I was like asking for it and relentlessly. And then he just silenced me with that one statement, by your own sadhana, you will have that. And I was like, I get it. That's what I need. Like sadhana is how you earn that which you were given by the guru. But in the presence of the guru, there is that transmission. And Sri Ramakrishna, that was a transmitter par excellence, whose presence we're feeling right now. That's the energy we're feeling right now. That if you are at all feeling energy, that we'd argue that's the lineage, that's Sri Ramakrishna. So it's a blessedness that you feel, but interestingly, it's a blessedness that also is conveyed. So we call this maybe contact high or something is a word we can, I don't know, maybe use. It's like that's the kind of madness that these people had. And then the third thing, like I was saying, is that they don't preach, they don't proselytize. Mm, Let's come to the second kind of madness. So having defined divine madness to some extent, second kind of madness we call it political. This is where when we see someone behaving in a way that doesn't match our like standard, we call them mad. Not that those actions are actually bad, not that they're actually causing harm, it just doesn't conform with the norm. So like if you want to demonize like say women or something, you could use the word hysteria or something like that. You could say like, oh, like these are political uses of the word madness. And so sometimes when we talk about madness, that's what we mean. We're like, oh, it's just the ruling power defining the norm and then using that word to like pejoratively call out those people who don't follow the norm. So for instance, if you were in Gregorian Europe and then there was the calendar and then you were like, no, but the new year starts in March. April Fools, you guys are all fools because you think the year starts in April. Actually, the year starts in January. Like, you're all mad for thinking the year starts in March when really it starts in January, right? Like, that's another way in which we talk about madness. And so, like, look, you see, the reason why this discussion is really hard to have is because people conflate the different ways in which we talk about madness. So now we're talking about a political kind of madness, which has to do with regimes and normalcy and policing against those who would step out of normalcy. So, like, divine madness aside, if you grew up in a family of accountants and you decided to be an artist instead, people might think, oh my God, you're mad because you're doing something against the grain, you know? Or this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with spirituality. This is all political. The political use of the word madness, and it doesn't have anything to do with mental illness. So this kind of lunacy, this kind of madness is societal, it's cultural, it's very rarely psychological, and sometimes it's spiritual, but often it's not. You know, so spiritual madness I've described. Now this I'll just call political, cultural, or sociological or societal madness. That's not what I'm talking about. The third kind of madness is what I want to address. And this third kind of madness is the not fun kind. You know, and the two opposites often resemble one another. This is true for many things in life. Like sattva and tamas tend to represent one another. The loud sound and a very soft sound are equally inaudible. Are they the same though? No, they're very different decibels. A very high frequency vibration, like light, and a very low frequency vibration, both are invisible. I'm thinking like ultraviolet and infrared. But are they the same? They're both apparently the same because they're both apparently invisible. But in truth, there's a difference. There's a world of difference. Take a person who is silent because she is wise, and take a person who is silent because he is a fool. Now, compare the two. Is it the same silence? Apparently, they're both silent. Apparently, they both look like the same. But actually, go deeper and you'll see one is silent because they know, one is silent because they don't know. You know, it's a really, really important point. Some people are mad and inwardly they're suffering. Other people are mad and inwardly they're joyous. Outwardly, it looks the same though. So I want to warn you. This is a very important warning. Do not conflate madness, the not fun kind, which can be diagnosed in the Western psychiatric world very well. Do not conflate that with the kind of madness that we are, dare I say, fetishizing in Chaitanya or Ramakrishna. Because they never saw any negativity, they were fully blissful, they were a blessing unto others. But our kind of madness, our psychiatric illnesses, they often bring suffering into our lives. Like we don't like it when it happens. It makes us feel bad. We're paranoid. There's all sorts of language that you can use to describe why this would be undesirable. But also, sometimes when people are experiencing episodes like this, they do harm unto others. So like they might hallucinate that their partner is like a demon or something and then kill them. Or like, you know, I've seen a lot of horror stories like this. But a lot of times when it comes to these kinds of things, we can hide behind the idea that the saints are mad, so I don't mind that I am. You know, it's like we fetishize madness, but we're not nuanced in what kind of madness we're talking about. This is the kind that maybe is undesirable, actually, because that other kind of madness, which I was talking about earlier, is desirable. It's desirable because when we look at it, it's the ultimate fulfillment in life. But this other kind of madness, though outwardly it might resemble the former, in truth, it's not desirable because inwardly it's not a good experience for yourself and for others. So when you go near someone like that, you might get the sense of they're unpredictable, you don't know what they're going to do next, you might feel afraid. And you're feeling afraid, maybe you're judging them, I don't know, it could be a holy person that you're judging, could be. But I would argue also sometimes you feel afraid because inwardly they're full of negativity and fear and like you get scared because they're scared actually. And when they speak, you realize how scared they are because suddenly they start talking about God, but then in between their conversation about God, they describe the devil and they describe like evil forces or they describe a mission. Nothing to me is more insane than the idea that there's the devil, the idea that there's bad in the world, the idea that there's something to be fixed, and the idea that there's a mission. This is how people get on boats, go to other people's countries and kill them all in the name of their dark god of madness, which they placed upon the throne of fanaticism. This is what religion looks like in most cases. People are mad, and they're mad because they think their way is the only way. Can you imagine the madness in that? You are one person in billions of people, and somehow you think your way is just for everyone? That's mad. It's mad to think that God can only appear in one way. And more importantly, it's mad to think that your way is the only way, because that discounts the experience of others. By mad here, I mean irrational in an undesirable way. Think a little bit and you'll see that my way can't be everyone else's way, because everyone else is not me. Everyone is different. So if you for one moment think that you should convert another person, check yourself. That is not divine. That is mad. And I'm not speaking in terms of like psychiatric psychological illnesses. I just mean like it's an error in reasoning. It's irrational to think that you can help anyone or cure anyone, because cure yourself, and what cure you found will probably only be good for you, right? Like, because you're unique. And so because you're unique, you cannot preach your cure unto others. That's why it's so beautiful to read Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, because you'll find that although there are some consistencies, for the most part, they're just trying to represent the tradition. They're not saying, oh, this is what I did, therefore you should do it. They're saying, this is what you could do because this master said so, or that master said so. It's like recognizing that my way is mine and your way is yours. Here are a bunch of different ways. Come to your own conclusions. So if it's this kind of psychosis, typically it's going to feel like I found God. And by the way, there could be a really ecstatic feeling here. And I'll get into Kundalini in a bit. But like there's ecstasy, joy. Maybe you can't sleep for days. Maybe you can't eat for days. And that joy is real. I'm going to say like that's a real spiritual experience, perhaps. But it gets clouded, it gets darkened with the subsequent thought, and everybody has to feel this. Like everyone in the world should feel the joy that I feel. Hare, why? Maybe they're feeling a different kind of joy. Why should everyone in the world feel the joy that you feel? The danger of this kind of joy is that you want to share it. But this is what happens. Because you think everyone should have this joy, and more importantly, because you know that you got this joy from this means, you want everyone else to get this means and get this joy. And if they don't, you'll kill them. Or you'll punish them, or you'll demonize them, or you'll be aggressive with them in their DMs trying to get them to convert. Like, this is what I notice almost ubiquitously when it comes to this Kundalini emergency or spiritual crisis. The need to convert others, or the need to, in a more positive guise, share their joy with others. It's not sharing joy, it's violence. It's the pushing on of some emotion or some experience that nobody wants to have, that you are having, that you should enjoy by yourself. Isn't that interesting? So if you think you have to help people or cure them, you're fucked. Like, you're going the wrong way. Be very careful. Like, that's madness. Secondly, if you think there is a devil, this is where it gets dangerous. There is a devil, there's some darkness, there's an evil force. It's so easy for that then to lead to violent action. Like, it's okay for me to kill all these people because they're deviating from the one true path of Allah, the one true path of Christ or something. They're not Hindus, so let's kill them, etc. The idea that there's bad in the world and that you are on the side of good is one of the most pervasive kinds of madness that we find in the world. And it tends to emerge when you do sadhana, because when you do a lot of spiritual practice, Kundalini things start to happen, which I'll describe in the next lecture next week. And when that Kundalini starts to happen, like when it happens, you feel that bliss and that joy and you think you know God. It's easy then for something else to creep in and then project into the world that there's a devil. Only the devil talks of the devil. Do you know what I mean? Like the evilest thing you could possibly do is propose evil. Because once you propose evil, you're now justified in killing it. It seems obvious, doesn't it? But be careful, like the experience of God might be so strong to the unprepared mind that you'll be convinced of it. You'll be convinced that there's bad in the world. There's the devil, there's darkness. And it's a very short walk from this conviction to either verbal abuse, which we find is true of almost every religion in the world. And that's not because of lack of spiritual practice. Sometimes it's that, but sometimes because of spiritual practice that they become fanatic. But not just verbal abuse. Sooner or later, it becomes physical abuse. And the history of religions is a history of violence, because it's a history of my way or the highway. But notice that might be rooted actually in some kind of undigested mystical experience. Some Kundalini awakening that was not properly digested. And you know why? It gives you energy. So a person who believes in the devil, who believes in evil, who also has an awakened Kundalini, is the kind of person who can do a lot of damage in the world, because they don't have to sleep at night. So you know what they can do? All night long, they can plan the Holocaust. While you're sleeping, they're up with all their energies planning the Holocaust, because they have energy. But you know what they use their energy for? Starting ashrams, getting rid of enemies. Like, all of that comes from this idea that there is evil in the world. So if there is ignorance, it is the assumption of ignorance. If there is impurity, it's the postulating of impurity. If there is evil, it is in the notion of evil itself, the idea that there is something bad. There is not. There is only God. everything is good, there are no problems. Actually, for Ramakrishna, for Chaitanya, for Vivekananda, that's what we saw. But for these people who claim to be divinely mad, we find instead evil, negativity, calling everybody out, everything is a problem. So that's, I think, the thing I would point out above all. These are some symptoms to watch out for. Like if you're having an ecstatic experience, and we'll get to the mechanics and the anatomy, tantrically speaking or Ayurvedically speaking, next week maybe, given the time. But like now, I'll just make this point. Kundalini mechanics aside, we'll get into that. But like now, if you're having some spiritual experience, be on the lookout for these things. The idea that there's evil, the idea that there's a devil, the idea that you have to share your experience with everyone in the exact same way, and the idea, I would even argue that like other people, that there are other people. Like it's all just God. So be wary of missions, be wary of work. Like we don't ever do work. If you think you're doing God's work, cure that. You're not. You're worshiping God in the form of that person in front of you. Be active, but don't ever think you're doing God's work. You're just worshiping God in the form of like a hungry person or I don't know, a tired person or something. And so therefore, the energy that we expend is not going to correct some evil or fix some problem or fight some devil. It's just going to worship God, to love on God. The energy is going back into God as opposed to going into some kind of weird directions in which it manifests disturbance in oneself and in others. So, having come to the conclusion then of this discussion, there are at least three kinds of madness. There's the divine madness, which we like and which we fetishize. There's the political, socio-cultural madness, which I'm not really interested in talking about. That changes from like season to season, like whatnot. You might be mad to wear purple when it's green season in like the fashion world. Like that's not the madness like I care about. And thirdly, the madness where it maybe we conflate it with divine madness and therefore fetishize it in spiritual circles. Refuse to seek help for it because we think it somehow points to something divine. And we're not entirely wrong. That's the danger here. The real conspiracies, the real lies in the world are only powerful because they're rooted in truth. A Jewish mystic told me this, that there's a word in Hebrew, um, Shekir, I think it's Shin, Kof, Resh. So he broke it up for me. The word Shekir, he said it starts with Shin, then Kof, and then Resh. And maybe Viran Alta can confirm this. But this mystic was like doing some kind of gematria. He was like reading the meaning of the symbols. And he said, oh, Kof and Resh mean the back of the head. So talking behind one's back. It's like conspiracy. But you know what Shin means, he told me? Truth. He said the reason why Shekir, conspiracy, is so powerful is because it has a seed of truth, but truth mangled. So conspiracy theories, they have a seed of truth in them, but beware, because that seed can easily become distorted with your projections, with your vikalpas. So what's happened is you've gone to the smashan, and like let me just use my metaphor again. If you go to the smashan and you like stay in the smashan, you're free. But you know what these people do? They leave the city in which they don't feel like they belong. They go to the smashan and they build another city there, but a really eerie, uncanny valley one, like a ramshackle city, a feeble city in which everything is chaotic. But they're attempting to create a conceptual structure around a non-conceptual experience, and that's where we are horrifically out of our depth. It's like trying to like swim in a stormy ocean, and we have only a log or something like that. It's like really tragic. We don't know how to swim, and we're clinging onto this log, the mind, but we're in the ocean, and because of our terror, we project demons and devils and whatnot. So if we are afraid, we project the devil. If I feel afraid, I will see things to be afraid of, right? If I'm not afraid, I will never like see anything to be scared of. So my point, finally closing with this point, is surrender to Ma in the smashan. The most important thing is when you go to the jungle, when you go to the smashan, you surrender to Ma, which means seeing her in all things, which means being absorbed in the bliss of chanting her name, contemplating her form, which means leaving everyone alone, for crying out loud. It means not embarking in some kind of grandiose, megomaniacal mission to save the world or to heal the world or to fix other people or to like share this experience or to like, fight the devil or the darkness or something. That's what it means to go to this smashan, to no longer have a problem with darkness. Swamiji, on this last day of life in this plane, he was walking down the stairs having meditated for some time on his last day, July 4th, 1902, and he was singing that Komalakanta song, which ends with a thrilling line, Mother, all my life I've contemplated thee, and what has happened? I've gone mad. Swamiji was mad in the last few moments of his life. Sri Ramakrishna was mad. We should be mad. But the kind of madness I'm talking about, do not conflate it with these other kind of disturbing forms of madness, which actually should be attended to. Either through Western psychiatric means, I'm gonna even like suggest like medicines can be very helpful for some people. We should be open to that. We should be open to all the modalities that are and find ones that are suitable for us, of course. But we should also be open to the idea that this should be fixed, not fetishized, not perpetuated, not presented as some badge of spiritual authority, but rather a disturbance in the force, no, a disturbance in the mind that should be attended to and can be corrected. And so for that, I think we'll save it for next week. I'm happy with this categorization, the distinguishing between divine and what I would, or fun or unfun madness, just to be very precise in the use of language here. Then next week, I want to do the Kundalini work. We'll talk about chakras, Kundalini, nadis, but mainly I want to give some like quote unquote traditional techniques for taking care of yourself with regards to all of this. Some of them seem like quite obvious, but there's a lot of depth. So next week we'll see you for that. Thank you all so very much. May all be mad with joy on this Purnima, on this full moon. May all be lunatics, lunatics for Luna, for that ma. May we all howl like jackals in the smashan, howling at the moon. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Mahonmata Bhairavarpanam Astu. Salutations to that supremely intoxicated, supremely mad Bhairava. Mahonmada Bhairavaya Namaha. Om Namah Shivaya.